Chapter 100, Alohomora. This should be the place. Gandalf spoke with the certainty of a man who had followed many riddles to their ends. Dewey nodded and brought his flying broom down onto the stone platform. As soon as they landed, he untied the ropes and loosened the enchantments he'd used to secure the dwarves. Beards and hair that had been neat were now wild from wind and travel. Thorin's, in particular, looked like it had been through a gale. He scowled and swore that, no matter how hard the road, he would never again ride Dewey's broom if he could walk instead. Bilbo, on the other hand, though equally tousled, was alight with excitement. The took in him thrummed with delighted anticipation. Stand by the gray stone when the thrush knocks, and when the last light of Durin's day falls upon the keyhole, Thorin read aloud, consulting the map of the lonely mountain and the translation Elrond had provided. He pointed to a huge gray rock set against the mountain wall. This must be the gray stone. Thorin strode to it, expecting to find the entrance immediately. He peered along the surrounding stone face. Where is the door? Where is the keyhole? He searched and prodded, but the wall was bare. The other dwarves joined in, running fingers along seams and crevices, calling out possibilities. The more Thorin found nothing, the more his impatience flared. He muttered that Elrond must have misled them. Calm yourself, Thorin, Gandalf admonished gently. The nearer we come to the end of such matters, the more we must keep our heads. The map says the last afterglow of the setting sun will mark the keyhole. It is still too early for sunset. We should wait, Gandalf added. Thorin's face remained tight, but he fell silent for the moment. If there is nothing when the sun goes down, he growled, I will make the Elves of Rivendell answer for it. Elrond would not lie, Gandalf replied, brows drawn. You must not let suspicion blind you now. Thorin snorted, unconvinced. Gandalf's jaw tightened. He moved closer to Dewey and whispered, the closer we come, the less measured he becomes. If the dragon's sickness takes hold. The Durin line's madness is not to be taken lightly, Dewey finished. If it breaks loose, it does not harm only the king. It takes others with it. Gandalf looked genuinely troubled. Dewey, however, was calmer. He put a hand on Gandalf's arm. We will deal with whatever comes, Gandalf. For now, there may be a way to find the back door without waiting for sunset. Gandalf's interest piqued. You have a spell to reveal a hidden door? Dewey shook his head and drew out the Palantir. This can do more than show distant places. It can sometimes reveal past events. Perhaps it will show how the door was opened. The word Palantir drew every eye. Thorin pushed forward, fierce curiosity making him forget his earlier temper for a moment. Use it, Duir. See for us. Dewey frowned as Thorin's gaze lingered a little too long on the crystal. The prince's unease had been growing since their approach to the mountain. Dewey had noticed the change. Gandalf, seeing the look, cautioned quietly. The dragon still sleeps in the mountain. Do not let the stone show you its site, or the beast may be alerted. Dewey understood the risk and concentrated only on what he needed. How far back the Palantir would reach depended on the viewer's will. Dewey could not hope to see the first or second ages, but he could touch scenes from a few hundred years past. He let his mind sink into the glass, seeking any image of a doorway. The crystal resolved into a scene. A stout dwarf crowned with iron stood where they now stood. He waited by the gray stone until the last glow of sunset and the rising moonlight met, and at that point a single bright spot gathered on the wall. The crowned dwarf put a golden key into a small, shining hole and turned it. Gears shifted. A rectangular slab slid outward to reveal a hidden door, and the crowned dwarf stepped through. That's my grandfather, Thorin cried, eyes wide, both excitement and something like sorrow crossing his face. They all turned to the wall, guided by the vision, and Thorin ran his fingers over the exact spot the Palantir had shown. He felt only rough stone. Where is the keyhole? The scene showed it here. Gandalf came forward and tapped the wall once with his staff. I think the keyhole is concealed, he said. It appears only under certain conditions, when the last light of Durin's day and the moonlight converge, perhaps. In other words, we might indeed have to wait until sunset. Then wait we shall, Thorin declared, trying to steady himself. Dewey, however, was intrigued. The dwarves were unmatched smiths, known to weave wondrous properties into their work. It was possible their craftsmanship had made the keyhole merely invisible to ordinary sight, or bound it by enchantment. Duir wanted to see whether his own magic could affect it. "Let me try," he said. He lifted his wand and aimed where the hole should be. Alohomora. A thin beam of light struck the stone. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the faint turn of gears from within the mountain echoed across the platform, and the ground gave a low, shivering tremor. To the dwarves' astonishment, a rectangular slab parted from the wall and withdrew, revealing a doorway that had been hidden for ages. It swung inward on its hinges, slow and inevitable. "All right," Dewey said with a small smile. "Seems we need not wait for sunset after all." The secret makers beneath the mountain, Dewey thought, had planned for many contingencies: a special time, a particular conjunction of light, and a key. They had not, however, accounted for a certain sort of outsider who could simply bypass those conditions and set their mechanism turning at once. The dwarves clustered at the open threshold, their faces lit by a new, fervent hope and by the golden light that leaked from within. Chapter 101: Entering the Lonely Mountain. Duir opened the secret door with a single, effortless spell. Thorin stared at the widening gap for a long moment, caught between relief and a fresh wave of anxiety. Relief that they had a way in, anxiety that the back door might now be useless. There was little time to dwell on it. One by one, they slipped through the narrow passage. The Durin kin had hollowed the lonely mountain into a city beneath a mountain, and the dragon had taken up his hoard in the great hall near the main entrance. The secret way led them safely around that approach, so at least for the moment they needn't fear being sniffed out the moment they crossed the threshold. Thorin, Balin, and the elder dwarves remembered every corridor and hidden chamber. They guided the company with quiet confidence to a small, well-concealed room. Bones lay along the passages, dwarven skeletons, the remains of those who had tried and failed to flee when the dragon first came. The sight chilled them all and made their steps softer. In the cramped, shadowed refuge, they paused. Even a whisper could travel if the dragon took scent. Smaug knew the smell of dwarves and men well. To press forward as a group would be to invite detection. All eyes turned to Bill. The only chance of reaching the Arkenstone without waking the dragon was to send one small, silent burglar in alone. If Mr. Burglar could steal the stone and slip back the way he came, they could leave with no confrontation. Then Thorin could, as king under the mountain, call the 7 clans and lead a proper reclaiming. Thorin stepped forward and laid a hand on Bill's shoulder. "It's down to you now," he said. "You can get the Arkenstone, can't you?" Bill shifted under the intense gaze and tried for a brave smile. I'll try." Thorin's hand tightened. "Not try," he said, voice rough. "You must get the Arkenstone." Something in Thorin's tone made Duir flinch. There was a fever there, an insistence that was not the dignity of a king, but the madness of someone consumed. He pushed Thorin away with a sharp gesture and planted himself between the hobbit and the dwarf. "Thorin Oakenshield," he said coldly. "Bill is no servant. Show him respect." Gandalf's face was lined with disappointment. "Thorin, come to yourself. Don't let this obsession eat you. You're slipping. Closer you get to the mountain, the more the sickness grows." "It was a mistake to bring you here," Duir said. "The closer you are to the treasure, the more the sickness takes hold. It will destroy you if you let it." Thorin's eyes flashed. "I have never been clearer. Nothing matters except the Arkenstone. With it, I will reclaim my home and my hoard. Everything else is small beside that." Gandalf stepped closer, voice gentle but urgent. "Your true treasures were never jewels, Thorin. You have companions, kin. Look at them. Don't let greed blind you." For a heartbeat, Thorin looked at the anxious dwarves, and his face softened, but the change was brief. The old fire in his eyes turned black and hard. "No, they are nothing," he said. "You're truly mad," Gandalf said, weary now. Duir's jaw tightened. "He won't listen," he murmured. "If his rage gets worse, we'll have to take him away. Perhaps out of the mountain's shadow he might be himself again." Before more could be said, Bill spoke up. His voice trembled, but it carried. "If I get the Arkenstone, won't it fix everything? You'll have what you want, Duir, and Gandalf, your work will be done. I can go home." The room fell utterly silent. Duir stared at the small figure before him, and something like pity and pride warmed his stern face. He crouched to meet Bill's eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked. Bill's nod was firm. "I am." Then I'll do what I can to keep you safe." Duir's hands moved, muttering spells as he laid layers of protection around the hobbit, soft, shimmering wards that made Bill feel slightly heavier, oddly insulated from the world. Protego maxima, protego totalum, repello muggletum, impervious silencio. He handed Bill a small pot. "Take this mandrake. If the dragon smells you, throw it, and it will give you time. I have enchanted it so you won't hear its cry." He pressed a gold coin into Bill's palm. "If you truly are in mortal danger, tap this coin. I'll know. We will come at once." Bill's grin broke into a bright, shaky laugh, and he flung his arms around Duir. "Thank you," he whispered. Duir patted his back, rough fingers surprisingly gentle. "Don't go farther than you must. If you can't get the gem, don't force it." Gandalf added his own blessing, surprised smile touching his lips. "May the Valar watch over you, Bill." Even if most heard the words as simple well-wishing, Duir felt a warmth settle on the hobbit, as if the blessing had weight. Duir slipped another enchantment over Bill, an extra disillusionment charm to blur him in the dragon's sight. And then, with a last look from every face in the chamber, Bill crept away toward the treasury. Left behind, the company sat in a tense, strained silence. Time moved slow, and Thorin's impatience grew like a visible thing. "Duir," he demanded at last, "you can see far with the palantir. Why not use it? Tell us how he's doing, or where the Arkenstone lies." Duir's reply came icy. "You heard Gandalf. Using the palantir would risk alerting the dragon. If you want the whole of us to die, go ahead." He bristled. "Bill is risking his life for you. If you question him now, go fetch it yourself." Thorin's face reddened, but he said no more. A tense hush fell once more, and then, from the depth of the mountain, a roar rolled out that shook the very bones of the halls. It was a terrible, triumphant sound, and every head turned toward the treasury at once. Chapter 102, Smaug the Dragon. After leaving the Chamber of Secrets, Bilbo crept into the treasury. The hall was vast, piled high with mountains of gold, silver, and jewels that threw back a tempting, dim light. Bilbo stood stunned before such wealth, and then panic seized him. Finding a fist-sized Arkenstone amid all that treasure would be like finding a needle in a haystack. And there was, of course, a great dragon somewhere in the mountain. He looked around, heart-pounding, but saw no trace of the beast. Had it hidden? Still, his invisibility and the protective wards Dewey had cast on him brought a measure of comfort. He moved cautiously across the coins. Hobbit feet make little sound, and Dewey's magic made him lighter than air. Even stepping on the gold made no noise. He searched, pile by glittering pile. Hours could have passed. Then, by fortune or fate, Bilbo found it. Perched on the summit of the highest mound of treasure, shining as if it contained a whole galaxy, was the Arkenstone. Before setting out, Thorin had been vague about its appearance, only that it would announce itself at first sight. Now Bilbo understood. The Arkenstone was a flawless, pure white gem, the heart of the mountain, forged from deep within the lonely mountain and set as the symbol of the dwarves' rule. Joy made Bilbo light on his feet. He climbed the glittering slope, reached the top, and leaned forward to seize the gem when the mountain of gold suddenly lurched. The coin slid like an avalanche, and the Arkenstone was swallowed in the glittering flood. A colossal shape rose from beneath the gold. Bilbo's stomach dropped. He had been standing on the dragon's head. He threw himself off, rolled across the coins, and scrambled away. The dragon opened enormous eyes, vertical slit pupils fixing on Bilbo's faint, shifting figure. "Little thief," the dragon rumbled, voice like stones grinding, "you carry neither dwarf nor human scent. What are you? What magic hides you from sight?" The dragon's tail whipped out and coiled, cutting off Bilbo's escape. "I smell you, hear your breath, feel your presence. You can't hide." Bilbo swallowed and tried to steady his thumping heart. He met the dragon's gaze and answered as carefully as he could. "Smaug, the wealth unlimited. I'm a hobbit. I got in here by accident. I'm sorry. I'll go." "Stumbled in?" The dragon's mouth twisted with mockery. "Lies, little thief. I have seen countless fools come for my gold, each thinking himself clever. When they are caught, they beg and flatter, and all the same end." Bilbo's hand moved to his pocket before he knew it. "And that end is," he asked, dread rising, "to be burned to ash by my fire." The dragon's chest heated. A wave of scorching air rolled out across the hall. Bilbo snatched the ring from his finger and slipped it on. He vanished into shadow as the flames leapt from the dragon's mouth, and Smaug's eyes found nothing. "Come out, little thief," the dragon called, taunting. "Do not hide in the dark." There was another thread to the dragon's voice now, a low, seductive lilt. "I sense something else about you, something of gold, but far more precious. It resembles something an old acquaintance once owned. It holds strange power." The words had a pull to them. When Bilbo let his guard drop, he took off the ring and reappeared. "Aha, so you are here!" Smaug's pupils sharpened. The beast had the look of one who has found his prey. Bilbo's pulse hit his throat. He jerked his hand into his enchanted pocket, pulled out a mandrake root, and flung it with all his strength. The mandrake screamed. The sound, high, keening, terrible, rolled through the empty vault and struck the dragon like steel through flesh. Smaug's head snapped back, his face contorted in pain. The shriek cut to the very center of him. He thrashed, roaring, ears and mind assailed by that relentless cry. The dragon spun and thrashed, but the sound echoed everywhere. Where could he hide? Only when he rolled and buried the mandrake beneath the coins, silencing it, did the agony lessen. Smaug recovered, every movement now charged with fury. "Little thief," he bellowed, voice like thunder. "I will have my revenge. I will burn you and your kin. I will find them all and scorch them with my fire." Bilbo had run far, but the vow of vengeance sent cold dread through him. He pictured the Shire aflame because of him. "No," he thought, "I will not let him leave the mountain." He fumbled for the gold coin Duir had given him and tapped it with his finger. "Got you," he muttered, partly to himself. In an instant, the dragon was on him, their faces inches apart, those vertical eyes gleaming with cruel triumph. Smaug lunged to unleash his fire. A blinding spell streaked across the vault and slammed into the dragon. "Duir!" Bilbo cried, as if in relief. A figure on a flying broomstick burst into view. Duir. He swooped down, scooped Bilbo up, and swung him onto his back, letting the dragon's flames miss them by inches. Duir stood over Bilbo, staff in hand, eyes grave as he faced the unharmed Smaug. The spell he had cast had flashed brilliantly, but it had not pierced the dragon's scales. Smaug shifted his gaze to the new arrival, wary and puzzled. "A wizard?" the dragon said, stopping his assault. He regarded Duir with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Who are you? Where do you come from?" Chapter 103. Battle with the dragon. Smaug's question hung in the cavern like a pulse of cold, corrupting air. Duir did not answer. The dragon's words were not mere speech, but a form of sorcery, an almost hypnotic enchantment that could bend wills. Smaug's voice, his gaze, the very treasures he had slept upon for centuries, all carried a malignant persuasion. Ordinary men and dwarves were helpless before it. Meeting his eyes could strip a creature of its free will. Even the horde itself exuded a maddening influence. That was the origin of Thorin's dragon sickness. Dragons had almost no weaknesses: cunning intelligence, uncanny perception, curses that could warp the mind, a breath of white-hot fire, and armor-like defenses in body and magic. They were dark creations of Morgoth, formidable, near-perfect predators. Facing the only active dragon in Middle-earth was to face an almost impossible foe. Duir made his choice. Avada Kedavra! A blinding green jet leapt from his wand and struck Smaug full in the chest. The dragon gave a long, keening shriek and collapsed backward into his treasure hoard, all the light snuffed from his eyes. Bilbo, crouched behind Duir on the broom, stared with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Is he dead?" he whispered. For a heartbeat, Duir allowed himself to hope. Could it really have been that simple? But before he could move forward to check, hurried steps echoed through the cavern, Gandalf and the dwarves rushing in. The dwarves' stunned silence broke into joyous cries when they saw Smaug lying motionless on the gold. Thorin's face, pale and tense for so long, finally softened into an expression of rapture that frightened them all. His nightmare, it seemed, was dead, and his kingdom's claim might yet be restored. Gandalf's exultation died as quickly as it had risen. He stared at the fallen dragon with sudden alarm and shouted, "Quick! Get out of the way! He's not dead!" Flames flared in Smaug's eyes. With a hideous, renewed hatred, he opened his cavernous maw and spewed a torrent of searing fire toward the gathered company. Duir, thinking faster than the rest, shouted, "Protego Maxima!" and threw up the strongest ward he knew. Dragonfire slammed into the barrier, and the collision sent a shockwave through the cavern. The heat was beyond ordinary measure. Gold liquefied where it was touched, and even Dewey's protective field blistered and crumbled under the onslaught. The shield held enough to prevent immediate immolation, but everyone felt the flame's terrible heat pressing at them. Smaug, raging and panicked, lashed his ponderous tail like a battering ram, smashing pillars and shattering stone in an attempt to crush them all beneath a ruin of rock. "Retreat into the main hall, now," Gandalf ordered. The dwarves scrambled, using broken pillars and the shadows for cover, running toward the heart of the mountain. Gandalf followed. Dewey and Bilbo were the last to move. They leapt onto a broomstick and wheeled away just before the protective barrier failed entirely. "Vengeance! Wizards, dwarves, hobbits, I will burn you all!" Smaug roared, his voice full of fury and a new, concentrated hatred for Dewey. Though the killing curse had not destroyed him, it had inflicted terror, something Smaug had never truly known. For the first time, he felt like prey. The spell had pierced the edges of his soul. If that young wizard grew stronger, Smaug realized with raw, blind fury, the tables might one day be turned. "Duir, he's gaining on us," Bilbo cried, glancing back as the dragon thundered after them on beating wings. Dewey banked the broom hard, avoiding another gout of flame, and a memory from some other school of magic flashed through his mind. A curse taught to handle dragons by blinding or stinging their eyes. He wheeled the broom and charged directly at Smaug, raising his wand. "Eye-stinging hex!" Smaug, supremely confident in his bulk and magical resilience, did not see it coming. His vision went suddenly black. Disoriented, bereft of the keen sight that guided his strikes, he slammed into the mountainside with a sound like a mountain breaking. For the moment, the dragon was lost and roaring, fire coughing from his nostrils, and Dewey could only use the respite to put distance between them. They made it back into the main hall, where Gandalf and Thorin waited with the other dwarves. Thorin's eyes cut to Bilbo first. "Bilbo, did you get the Arkenstone?" he demanded. Bilbo's shoulders sagged. "No, I'm sorry, I didn't have time before Smaug woke." Thorin's face hardened into scorn. "So our master burglar saves his own skin and forgets his task," he spat. Bilbo's guilt was immediate. He hung his head. Dewey stepped between Bilbo and Thorin, pulling the hobbit close, and let his contempt show. "The dragon's been driven to us. If anyone's to send a dwarf into the horde now, it's you. Pray the Arkenstone is made of something that can survive dragon fire. If it isn't, then you won't be king under the mountain after all." Thorin's expression twisted with worry and fury. The other dwarves exchanged grim looks. Smaug's flames were not ordinary fire. They had already melted common metals and had destroyed 4 of the 7 dwarven rings when they had touched them. If the Arkenstone had been exposed to such heat, it might be gone, consumed into liquid gold along with the rest of the horde. Gandalf cut through the argument. "Focus. The priority is Smaug. If we don't neutralize him, Lake Town and its people will be in terrible danger." Plans formed quickly. Balin suggested luring Smaug into the forge and using molten metal as a weapon. Dwalin spoke of a pool of acidic runoff known to corrode the hardiest metals. Perhaps it could eat through the dragon's scales. Feely proposed setting explosive charges to distract or wound him. Ideas flew as they divided tasks and prepared traps. Fear and resolve made them sharp. Dewey's attention, however, was tugged by something more modern and incongruous than tunnels and forges, a system prompt floating in his mind. "Hogwarts Sign-in System, locating Lonely Mountain. Do you wish to sign in?" "Sign in," he said without hesitation. "Sign-in successful. Congratulations, new acquisition, the Book of Abraham." Dewey's hand tightened on the broom. The name puzzled him. He opened the book to the first page. The words seemed to move under his gaze. His pupils narrowed, and his breath came quicker. Whatever sleep he might have had about the meaning of dragons and curses, whatever certainty he had clung to, shifted in that instant. The book's first lines promised knowledge, and something else, something that made the cavern suddenly feel smaller and much more dangerous. Chapter 104. Sign in to the Magic Stone. The Book of Abraham, originally known as the Jewish Book of Abraham, had a history wrapped in legend. It was said to have been delivered by an angel and to contain the secret of eternal life. Nicholas Flamel had used it as the key to create the Philosopher's Stone, an object capable of transmuting lead into gold, producing a universal panacea, and distilling an elixir of immortality. Flamel himself had lived over 600 years because of it, before finally destroying the stone and renouncing immortality. Dewey had stumbled across the method to make the Philosopher's Stone, and the discovery stirred something dangerous and irresistible inside him: immortality. He was still young by many measures, but Middle-earth teemed with long-lived beings: elves who never seemed to age, Gandalf with his ageless, ancient demeanor, dwarves who routinely lived centuries, Thorin Oakenshield, for example, outwardly youthful, yet already 195. Among men, there were the Dunedain, whose lifespans could stretch past 200 years. Even hobbits lived longer than ordinary men. Bilbo's extended vitality and the ring's corrupting influence had kept him looking the same for decades. The current year was Third Age 2941. There were 77 years until the War of the Ring in 1318. By that time, Dewey calculated, he would be a very old man. He should be able to live until then. His position as a wizard likely ensured it, but he did not want to face those years as a decrepit shell. The Philosopher's Stone offered a possible alternative. He recalled dimly an important flaw in Flamel's immortality. It granted life, but not eternal youth. Still, it was a path, and for now, the only one within his reach. He had little time to reflect. The mountain around them thundered and groaned as the companions prepared to finish the battle with Smaug. Dewey had first tried to blind the dragon. His blinding spell had worked briefly, but Smaug tore through the stone wall and pursued them anyway. This time, however, Smaug was wary. The dragon had developed a translucent, nictitating membrane across his eyes. When Dewey launched the blinding spell again, it slid off harmlessly. Riding his flying broomstick, Dewey dodged the dragon's sweeping claws and scalding breath and led Smaug toward the acid pools the dwarves had prepared. The dwarves had pinned their hopes on corrosive vats that could burn through even the hardest ore. But even acid that could eat metal proved little more than a hot bath for Smaug. His scales shrugged it off. Their explosives, too, were feeble beside the dragon's power, less than the scratch of one of Dewey's exploding bolts. They needed something bigger. Dewey threaded Smaug into the heart of the forge, where Gandalf struck the main anvil and opened a reservoir of molten rock. Lava poured out like a wave and submerged the dragon. "Did it work?" Balin asked, hope making his voice thin as he peered down into the roaring pit. Dewey hovered on his broom, watching the heaving gold. "I'm afraid I disappoint you, Mr. Balin. Dragons breathe superheated fire themselves. Lava probably won't kill him." He kept his eyes fixed on the mass below, but it's a chance to trap him. He pointed his wand at the molten river. Glacius. A spear of cold shot from the tip and met the searing flood. The lava seized and quivered, the air around it collapsing into a biting, misty cold as steam froze into frost. The molten gold solidified with a metallic crack, cooling into a gleaming, impenetrable floor that encased Smaug. Frost feathered the air. Everyone could see their breath. Balin shivered. He shouldn't be able to get out now, right? Dewey frowned. He felt no motion from the dragon, but he did not trust silence. Gandalf? Gandalf studied the sealed floor. "We mustn't let down our guard. Dragons keep tricks." Thorin could not keep still. "Now the dragon is trapped. We'll find the Arkenstone," he said. "Only with the Arkenstone will the 7 clans answer me. Then I will reclaim what I have lost. Then I will have my vengeance." He stepped toward the glossy golden ground, toward his long-sought heart of the mountain. "Don't move, Thorin," Gandalf called, urgent and sharp. Thorin paid him no mind. The moment he set foot on the gold, the floor beneath him began to change. The frost-laden surface pulsed and grew hot. In a heartbeat, the golden crust swelled, reddened, and ruptured like a living volcano. Torrents of molten gold and tongues of flame spurted up and sprayed outward. "Gandalf, save him!" Balin cried. Dewey flicked his wrist. Thorin flew back as if struck by a gust and slammed against the stone wall, crumpling unconscious. The seal shattered with a roar. Smaug's head burst free of the golden crust, molten scales flaring. He unfurled wings that shimmered like molten metal. He lunged through the breach and blasted a gout of dragonfire toward the mountain's entrance. "Revenge," the dragon bellowed, voice a thousandth of thunder. "You will see my revenge. I will set this land ablaze, death and ruin for all of you. This is your doing." Gandalf's face went ashen. "Dewey, stop him. Don't let him leave." Dewey pushed his broom to its limit, and chased after the dragon as it tore through stone and took to the air. He cast with everything he had. Crucio! The curse struck Smaug's back with the force of a battering ram. The dragon's muscles locked. A howl tore from him, as if an invisible lance had skewered his very being. Bone and marrow aflame, organs convulsing, soul raked raw. He writhed and shrieked in pain so vast that the sound rolled across the plains. In Lake Town, people stumbled from their homes to listen, eyes wide with fear. In the great halls of Mirkwood, the elven king stared toward the lonely mountain, a worry like a shadow falling across his face. The dragon's cry announced to the world what had been unleashed within the mountain and warned of the peril that would still not be easily contained. Chapter 104, Cruciatus Curse. The Crucio, one of the 3 unforgivable curses, was designed purely for torment. Unlike Avada Kedavra, which kills, Crucio rends body and soul. Even the strongest wills can be broken by it. Prolonged exposure can leave a person a living husk. To Dewey's surprise, the curse's effect on Smaug was even more devastating than a killing blow. Under Crucio, the dragon did not fly. He writhed and rolled on the ground, shrieking. The pain seemed to reach into his very being. "Spare me, wizard! Spare me! I surrender!" Smaug howled at last, pleading for mercy. Everyone watched in stunned silence as the great dragon begged Dewey, unable to recover. The dwarves were torn. Smaug had driven them into exile, killed their kin, and now he was pleading for his life. Dewey wasn't fooled. The Crucio could inflict unbearable agony, but it was not fatal. The moment the spell ceased, the dragon would recover. If given a chance to breathe, Smaug would rise again, even more dangerous. Dewey pushed harder, pouring every ounce of malice and power he could summon into the curse. Crucio! Smaug's next scream was a raw, animal sound. He writhed violently, battering the surrounding mountains with his bulk. In the midst of that agony, he found one last reserve of strength and lashed his tail like a wrecking ram into the giant stone pillars holding up the main entrance. The supports cracked and splintered under the blow. The mountain mouth collapsed, and a torrent of boulders and rubble thundered down. Dewey was forced to break his concentration to shield himself from the falling rock. Seizing the opportunity, Smaug beat his wings and took off, rising into the sky. "I will remember this humiliation, wizard," he roared. "I will have my revenge. I will turn everything you hold dear to ash." His eyes fixed on the distant lights of Lake Town. Malice burned in them. "You will be the first to feel my wrath." Gandalf's face tightened with worry. "He's going to destroy Lake Town. We must stop him." "I'll chase him." Dewey grabbed his flying broomstick, but Gandalf was already calling, "I'm coming with you." There was no time to argue with Bilbo or the dwarves. Dewey and Gandalf mounted their broomsticks and shot after the dragon as fast as they could. Without Smaug to guard it, Erebor was safe for the moment. By the time they caught up, Smaug was already spewing flame over Lake Town. Panic and chaos reigned below. Roofs caught quickly, and people ran through smoke and fire. The master tried to flee with a boat piled high with gold and jewels, but the weight slowed him. Dragonfire consumed him and his riches into ash. High in a tower stood Bard, descendant of Girion, Lord of Dale. He drew the black arrow his family kept and watched for an opening. Seeing Bard, Dewey and Gandalf didn't hesitate and charged straight at Smaug. "Take me above him, Dewey," Gandalf shouted. "We must stop him from raining fire on the town." Dewey angled his broomstick up and shot them straight over Smaug's head. Without waiting, Gandalf leaped from the broom, landed on the dragon's broad back, and drove his blade, foe hammer, deep into the hide. The dragon's scales were like living armor. The sword sank only halfway before jamming. To Smaug's massive bulk, the strike was an annoyance rather than a wound. Smaug twisted, trying to fling Gandalf off like a pest. But Gandalf clung to his sword as the dragon writhed, refusing to be dislodged. Enraged, Smaug stopped worrying about the town below and turned to breathe fire at the intruder clinging to his back. Dewey's voice rose again. "Crucio!" The dragon's body shuddered, and he let out another tortured scream, plummeting toward the lake. Just before he hit the water, he opened his wings and shot back into the sky, using the fall to wriggle free of the curse's immediate effect. Seeing Smaug use evasive drops to foil him, Dewey spied Bard on the tower, bow at the ready. He wheeled his broom toward him. "Bard," Dewey called out, "there's a gap in his chest scales. Your ancestor Girion struck it with a black arrow before. Aim for that spot. Bard's eyes sharpened. Dewey steered his broom to drive Smaug toward the tower, hoping to recreate the moment fate once favored. The dragon, now wary of Dewey's crucio, accelerated, trying to keep distance. But he had other problems. Gandalf had twisted his sword with all his weight into Smaug's back, and each impact rocked him like a hammer. The dragon staggered, nearly crashing to the earth. Dewey closed in and hurled the crucio again. Smaug, reeling and desperate, fled toward Bard's tower, unaware that Bard knocked the black arrow. "For Lake Town for Dale!" Bard bellowed, threw back his head, and loosed the shaft. The black arrow flew true toward the exposed gap on Smaug's chest. For a moment, everyone held their breath, expecting the familiar, fateful end. Then, with a swift, mocking snap, Smaug caught the arrow in a giant claw. He sneered. "Did you think I'd make the same mistake twice?" He flung the arrow high, tipped his head back, and breathed a blistering gout of flame that melted the arrow into a blob of molten slag. He smeared the molten metal into the hollow on his chest, sealing the vulnerable spot closed. Bard's face crumpled with despair. Dewey felt his heart drop. He had hoped Bard would recreate the single desperate act that once felled the dragon. But now everything had changed. Dewey thought it through. In the old course of events, luck and Smaug's arrogance had aligned. The dragon had been unaware and careless, and Bard had a single, improbable chance. Now Smaug had been badly wounded and driven out of his lair. He had tasted pain and become cautious. He no longer moved with careless confidence. The odds of killing him with a black arrow had narrowed drastically. As Smaug banked away, sealing his chest and turning his wrath toward the smoldering town, the grim truth settled on Dewey and Gandalf. Whatever had once been destiny had shifted. This battle would not yield to fate so easily. Chapter 1-6 Dragonfall. The black arrow had failed to kill Smaug, melted outright by his dragonfire. The hope that had lit every face around Bard went out with it. "Bard, there's still a chance," Dewey shouted, trying to rouse him. Bard looked up, forced a bitter smile, and shook his head. "The only black arrow that could kill the great dragon is gone. What can we do now?" Dewey reached into his spatial pouch and drew out a magnificent spear that shimmered with a cold, silver light. "This is Aeglos, the spear of Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor. It once pierced the Dark Lord Sauron's armor and wounded him. Its penetrating power is unbreakable. It's almost the same length as the black arrow. Use it to strike the dragon." He tossed the silver spear to Bard. Bard took it with visible surprise. He recognized in an instant that this was no ordinary weapon. It was far more precious, sharper, and deadlier than his ruined black arrow. Still, concern creased his brow. "Smaug's already wary," he said. "The gap in his chest scales has been mended with lava. He won't give us the same opening twice." Dewey's face was calm and confident. "We won't be aiming for that gap." "Not there?" Bard echoed. "No, aim for his wing." Dewey's voice hardened. "I'm going to give you one shot, to sever a wing and ground him. Can you do it?" "I can," Bard answered without hesitation. Dewey held Bard's steady gaze for a long heartbeat, as if hoping fate would finally favor them. Then he swung his flying broom and chased Smaug. On the dragon's back, Gandalf was fighting just as fiercely. One hand clutched Foehammer, his sword, now embedded in Smaug's flesh. The other gripped his staff and cast a constant stream of blinding holy light to keep the dragon's eyes shut and force him into erratic flight. A second tormenting spell, Crush, kept Smaug slowed and disoriented. Whether by design or instinct, Dewey and Gandalf's actions corralled the dragon back toward Bard. When Smaug came into range, Dewey poured every ounce of power into one last spell. Imperio. The command hit Smaug like a freight wave. For the first time, Dewey felt the monstrous weight of a dragon's soul, the reason simple killing curses had failed. Applying Imperio to Smaug's mind was like trying to move a titan. It strained him to his limits. Still, the spell took hold enough to daze the beast. Smaug's movements slowed, and his thoughts clouded. "Now, Bard!" Dewey's shout split the air. Bard braced Aeglos on the great crossbow. As the silver spear flew, it became a streak of light, a lethal whisper through the sky. It hammered through scale after scale and struck the dragon's wing at its connection to the body. Smaug howled, a sound of furious pain, and dropped like a clipped gull, gravity dragging him toward the long lake. Gandalf, still clinging to his sword, tried desperately to staunch the fall, but the force was brutal. Smaug hit the lake with a thunderous crash that sent monstrous waves outward. Even submerged, the dragon's bulk kept half his body above the water. Gandalf stayed standing on his back, unharmed, his staff flashing as he kept striking the beast, forcing it down again and again. Smaug tried to claw free and rise, but the wounded wing would no longer bear him. He writhed and screamed, a terror-given voice. Freezing cold. Dewey breathed, the air around him turning sharp. The surface of the lake began to ice over, webbing outward as he tried to entomb the dragon in a shell of frost. Smaug bolted against the encroaching chill with a last, mad rage. He spewed fire so hot it scalded the lake itself, roaring and spraying flame even against his own bleeding wing to keep the water from freezing. The conflagration forced Gandalf to leap clear. The flames were stubborn and voracious. They licked outward across the lake, threatening Esgaroth itself. "Duir, we have to stop him blasting flames, or Esgaroth could be lost," Gandalf cried. Dewey didn't hesitate. Aqua Eructo! He summoned the water with everything he had. A vast whirlpool rose, pulling and spinning the lake into a tumbling, rotating sphere. Dewey had learned this advanced water magic from the grim pages of old, an immense prison of whirling water. The vortex caught Smaug and pounded him like a log in a mill. Every time the dragon opened his maw, a sluice of lake water poured into his throat. The flames were smothered, starved of air. Casting such sustained magic wore on Dewey's mind. He did not have the luxury of stopping to rest. He kept the current tight and relentless, sweating with the strain. Just when fatigue threatened to break his concentration, a warm power flowed through him. Gandalf's ring, Narya, flamed faintly and poured energy into him, renewing his strength. With that spark of fire's will behind him, Dewey drove the water harder. The whirlpool thickened, closing like a fist, until the dragon was completely engulfed. Minute bled into minute. At last, Smaug's struggles slackened. For an instant he lay still, and the two wizards allowed themselves the smallest cautious hope. But they did not celebrate. Smaug's life force was vast and cunning. Too many things had been won by assuming victory too early. Sure enough, the great eyes opened again beneath the water, cold with unwillingness and blazing with rage. Chapter 107, Surrender. Seeing the dragon still alive inside the water sphere, Dewey's brow tightened. He raised his wand and poured everything into the strongest transfiguration charm he could muster. The water shimmered and reformed into a colossal python, far larger than Smaug himself. It coiled tight around the dragon, and then solidified into massive iron chains that bound him immovably. When it was done, Dewey breathed hard, paling. Transfiguring a creature that size had nearly drained him. If not for Gandalf's ring of fire, he would never have attempted it. "Are you all right?" Gandalf asked, concern in his voice. "I'll live," Dewey said, waving a hand to clear the dizziness. "But first we deal with this dragon." With Smaug's jaws clamped by the chains, they had no fear of a sudden gout of flame. Gandalf climbed onto the dragon's back and wrenched free the foe hammer lodged there. Dewey went to the wounded wing, grabbed Eglos with both hands, and hauled until it came free. Black, lava-like blood welled from the wound. The dragon groaned. Dewey flicked his wand and forced the beast to roll, exposing its chest. A missing scale left a ragged gap, now patched over by a molten black material, an arrowhead-like smear that had hardened into a seamless, iron-hard plate. It was as strong as the original scale. From any ordinary perspective, Smaug had no weak points left. But Dewey was not ordinary. He tapped the black iron with the tip of his wand. Instead of remaining inert, the patch softened, flowed, and reformed into a long giant iron spike that drove itself inward. Smaug reacted with raw terror, muscles tensing as the nail dug toward his heart. "No, don't kill me!" The dragon transmitted the plea telepathically. "I surrender. Spare me, and I will not seek revenge. I will give you all my treasure." Gandalf's face grew hard with distrust. "Dewey, don't be fooled. Dragons are crafty. They twist words like spells." Dewey smiled faintly. "I know. I won't be swayed." He wasn't trying to be charitable. He had a different plan. "I have a contract spell that binds only when both sides sign willingly, and with a witness it becomes absolute. Gandalf, will you witness?" Gandalf's frown deepened. "Can such a thing truly hold him? Let's find out." Dewey's confidence showed in his voice. He turned to Smaug, cold and direct. "Smaug, do you swear to obey me and serve me? If not, I will send you to your death right now." Dewey pressed Eggless edge against the dragon's forehead to punctuate the threat. Smaug's eyes flickered with a sudden, greedy hope. He nodded quickly. "Yes, I will." Dewey smirked inwardly. Whether Smaug meant it or was lying didn't matter. The spell required the dragon's voluntary assent. Once sealed, there would be no breaking it. Dewey cast a silencing charm around himself and Gandalf and blurred the view for any onlookers, then handed Gandalf an unbreakable vow charm he had prepared earlier. Gandalf's initial reluctance shifted to astonished admiration as he realized what Dewey intended. When Dewey removed the silencing charm, he was back to business. "From this moment, you will do everything I command, without hesitation," he said, voice icy. "If there is even a moment of resistance, that iron spike will continue to grow until it pierces your heart." Smaug's fear was unmistakable now. He nodded again, voice small. "I hear you. I will obey." There was no time for more words. Dewey placed his hand on the dragon's brow and began the binding chant. Gandalf, as witness, laid the wand Dewey had given him on top of Dewey's hand, channeling the charm. Invisible magic flowed between them. Smaug felt it like a cold net tightening around his soul. At once the iron spike in his chest surged inward, and Smaug sensed its tip touch the edge of his heart. Panic tore through him. He had never heard of this kind of contract magic that bound the soul itself. He had planned to break any bargain later, to retaliate when opportunity allowed, but here there was no time. The spike in his chest pressed toward finality. "I agree. I agree." Smaug howled, word and desperation won. As his consent left his lips, Gandalf's wand flared. A thin, dazzling tongue of flame, like a red-hot wire, lashed out, coiling around Dewey's hand and the dragon's neck. The fire braided into a single golden-red sigil and sank into their skin as a tattoo. "Smaug," Gandalf intoned, "do you swear never to betray or harm Dewey, to serve him until the end of your days?" "I swear it," the dragon gasped. Another flare etched the same mark into Dewey's right forearm and into the base of Smaug's throat. Over and over, with Gandalf prompting the precise legalities and loophole-closing phrases, Dewey spoke vows aloud and the wand sealed them, dozens of clauses covering every conceivable attempt at evasion. The ink-like patterns glowed, intricate and terrible. By the time the last oath sank home, the golden-red tattoos crawled like living filigree along Dewey's arm and ringed Smaug's neck. The chains binding the dragon faded away under Dewey's motion. Smaug's submission was not bluff. The magic was absolute. Any flicker of malice would make the tattoos snap to life, turning into red-hot wires that tightened, strangling him. His soul would suffer agony comparable to the worst curses known. And if he tried to turn on Dewey, the contract would kill him instantly before he could strike. "Master," Smaug murmured, head bowed so low his great horns nearly scraped the stone. The word came out almost reverent. Dewey did not smile. He felt the weight of power settle on him, the responsibility, the danger, and the certainty that for now, the dragon was bound. Chapter 108. Dragon Rider. Duir felt a rush of satisfaction at Smaug's submission. Gandalf, standing beside him, smiled warmly. "Congratulations, Duir," Gandalf said. "From this day on, you are the only person in Middle-earth who can tame a great dragon. That's an extraordinary accomplishment." The dragons had once been instruments of Morgoth's terror, monstrous and terrible across the ages. Even Sauron had tried and failed to bend them to his will. Dragons cared only for gold and jewels, not dominion. That greed and their hoarding of wealth had set them at odds with the dwarves for generations. Thror's line had been driven from the Grey Mountains when a dragon descended on their riches. His son Thrain-Force and another son Fror were slain. The surviving heir, Thror, led those who remained to the Lonely Mountain and founded the Kingdom Under the Mountain, a kingdom that later drew Smaug's avarice and doom. The dragon's sack of the mountain scattered Thorin and his people across Middle-earth for decades. Now Smaug lay subdued before Duir, a powerful ally instead of an unstoppable terror. Duir's own power had risen overnight. Controlling a great dragon had instantly placed him among the most formidable figures in the West. Once the dragon had been bound by Duir's will, Gandalf and Duir clambered onto his back to leave the lake. Smaug could not take to the air. One wing had been pierced, so he walked, carrying them toward Lake Town. Thanks to their intervention, the loss of life in Lake Town had been limited. Fires, however, raged on. Dragonfire is a cruel thing. water did little to restore what it had destroyed. As the frightened people watched from the docks, the distant form of Smaug growing larger filled them with dread. Bard tightened his grip on his bow and drew an arrow, ready to act if the dragon turned hostile, but then he caught sight of Duir and Gandalf on the dragon's back. Something in his stomach shifted. He hurried to the dock, heart pounding. A dragon could incinerate him in an instant if it chose. "Duir! Gandalf! What is this?" Bard called as Smaug approached, voice equal parts alarm and disbelief. Duir didn't answer with words. He waved his wand, sending spell after spell to smother the flames and halt their spread. Gandalf slid down Smaug's neck and leapt to the docks. He gave a small, reassuring laugh as he faced Bard and the gathered townsfolk. "The dragon has been subdued," Gandalf announced. "Smaug obeys Duir now. He will not harm you." For residents of Lake Town, descendants of the people of Dale who had fled upriver after Smaug's earlier attack, those words were almost impossible to believe. Smaug had been their nightmare. Bard's forebears had lost Riverdale's wealth and many of its people to the dragon. Their ancestors had floated down the river and rebuilt on this long lake to escape the beast's wrath. The idea that the same dragon could now be tamed by a stranger left them stunned into silence. Duir worked steadily until the worst fires were out. But some homes were ashes. Dragonfire left marks that even Duir's most powerful restorative charms could not fully erase. Seeing the ruined houses and the hollowed eyes of those who'd lost everything, Duir felt a pang of responsibility. Smaug's destruction had, by association, become his problem. He reached into his spatial pouch and pulled out a small leather bag, handing it to Bard. "This contains gold and jewels. Give them to the people who've lost their homes." Bard stared. When he opened the bag, the space inside seemed to go on forever. A pocket 2 meters deep, filled with dazzling coin and gemstones. There was a fortune there, more than even Lake Town's richest mayor had ever possessed. Distributed among the town, it would be enough for everyone to live comfortably. Bard's surprise didn't turn to greed. He took the bag with a steady hand and bowed his head in gratitude. "Thank you, Duir. I will accept this on behalf of the people. I will see it distributed so they can make it through the winter." The mayor had fled earlier, emptying his conscience along with a boat full of money, and had been taken by Smaug before anyone could stop him. With the mayor dead, and as a descendant of Girion of Dale, Bard had the natural authority to lead Lake Town now. Gandalf turned to him. "What do you plan to do, Bard?" Bard looked around at the charred frames and collapsed roofs. Resolution hardened in his face. "We were forced to live here," he said, "because Dale was destroyed. Now the dragon is no longer a threat. I will lead the people back and rebuild Dale." He met Duir's eyes. "Besides, the dwarves brought this dragon back when they stole into the Lonely Mountain. If they had not awakened Smaug, he would not have attacked Dale. They must compensate the survivors for what was taken. As a descendant of Girion, I have a claim to a share of the treasure Smaug looted and carried off to the mountain." Duir and Gandalf exchanged a quick look and nodded. That was a matter between Bard and Thorin Oakenshield. With that understanding, they did not linger in Lake Town. Once the fires were under control and the people had begun to salvage what they could, Duir and Gandalf mounted Smaug and set off for the Lonely Mountain. The townsfolk watched, still shaken. The memory of terror does not leave quickly. Smaug could not fly. The spear Aeglos had pierced his wing, and the weapon's divine power prevented natural healing. He was forced to travel on the ground, where, even so, his strides were swift and terrible. Riding his back, Gandalf laughed with a childlike wonder. "I never thought I'd ride a dragon," he said. "It's marvelous, even if we lack the air beneath us." Duir grinned, a thrill running through him. His only regret was that Smaug could not take to the skies. Aerial flight would have been the full experience of being a dragon rider. "Smaug," Duir asked, "how long until your wing heals?" The dragon's voice rumbled, threaded with bitterness. "Master, that spear is Aeglos, your divine spear. Its power prevents the wound from closing. Without a miraculous elixir, I don't think I'll fly again for a very long time." Bound by the vow curse, Smaug dared not speak ill of Duir, but his resentment showed in every tone. Duir's expression clouded. A grounded dragon was a lesser force, and he worried about the loss of their advantage. Gandalf put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Not to worry. Once this business is settled, we'll go to Rivendell. Lord Elrond is the greatest healer alive. He has cured wounds no ordinary hand could touch. Smaug's injury, even from a divine weapon, will be within his skill. Gandalf had once feared that Smaug might join with orcs or other darkness, which was why he had supported a dwarven expedition to the Lonely Mountain, to eliminate the dragon as a menace. But now that Smaug served Duir, Gandalf sincerely hoped the dragon would be restored. A healed Smaug would be a tremendous ally against the gathering shadow. They returned to the mountain, but at the main gate they found it shut fast. Stone and heavy timber had been set to bar the entrance. Gandalf frowned. "Why is it sealed? It wasn't like this when we left." Duir's lip curled. "Perhaps some inside do not welcome our return," he said. Gandalf's concern deepened. He remembered Thorin's earlier hostility. Before he could say more, Smaug himself spoke, eager and hungrily amused. "Master," the dragon said, "let me tear them out. No wall can hold me. I will burn the dwarves and take the mountain and its treasures for us." Gandalf's face darkened. Duir's patience snapped into a hard line. "Silence," he barked. Smaug fell quiet at once, though a knowing, restless light still burned in his great eyes. Subdued or not, a dragon's greed does not vanish. In Smaug's mind, if his master owned the Lonely Mountain's hoard, that made it his too. He could be the faithful guardian of the treasure, ensuring that not a coin disappeared. He did not yet understand that restraint would be demanded of him by the man who had bound him. Chapter 109, Mad Thorin. "Duir, you and Smaug wait here. I want a word with Thorin," Gandalf said. He did not want a fight between Duir and the dwarves. Even before the dragon returned, dwarves alone would have been hard-pressed to handle Duir. With a dragon involved, the 13 dwarves in the Lonely Mountain stood no chance. Duir didn't care for the treasure and had no intention of fighting them. "Be my guest," he said. "But Gandalf," Duir warned, "you'll be disappointed. Thorin's dragon sickness should have fully taken hold by now. He's likely irrational and mad with greed. He won't listen to reason." Gandalf sighed. "I must at least try." He dismounted Smaug and strode to the blocked gate. His voice rang out over the ruined courtyard. "Thorin Oakenshield, come out and speak with me." No answer came. He called again, louder and sterner. "Thorin Oakenshield, come out now." Silence answered him. Gandalf's patience thinned. He raised his staff as if to shatter the boulders sealing the gate. A small head then peered over the city wall. Bilbo, waving frantically. "Gandalf, I'm here," Bilbo called. Gandalf looked up, surprised. "Bilbo, where are Thorin and the others?" Seeing Gandalf, Bilbo seemed buoyed with hope and hurried to explain. He's become very strange. After you left with the dragon, he had Bofur and the others set charges and collapsed the gate, sealed it completely. Now he's ordered everyone to search the treasury for the Arkenstone. Oh, what's that?" He broke off as his gaze fell upon Smaug in the distance. His eyes went wide. "Gandalf, how did the dragon come back with you?" Gandalf smiled. "Duir subdued him. Smaug is now Duir's mount." Bilbo rubbed his eyes, hardly believing it. "After only half a day?" "Bilbo, go fetch Thorin," Gandalf said. Bilbo, still stunned, nodded and clambered off the wall to call. Time dragged. Gandalf's patience wore thin. Finally Thorin appeared, leaning on the battlements in that slow, imperious way. But when his eyes fell on Smaug behind Gandalf, they narrowed, and his whole body recoiled as if struck. "Gandalf," he cried, "what is the meaning of this? Why has the dragon returned with you? Have you colluded with him to steal my treasure?" Thorin's eyes were wild with obsession and suspicion. Gandalf frowned. Thorin's talk of treasure showed how far he had fallen. "Thorin, son of Thrain, you have reclaimed the Lonely Mountain. We rejoice for you," Gandalf called up. "But why does the king under the mountain hide behind a barricade like a brigand?" Thorin glared down at Gandalf, then at Duir and the dragon. "Bandits stand at my gate, planning to take my hoard," he spat. "I am not yet king under the mountain. The Arkenstone, the heirloom of my house, has not been found. I will allow no one to enter or leave until it is found." Gandalf felt a hard stab of anger and sorrow. "By the Valar, Thorin Oakenshield, no one here desires your treasure. You mustn't shut yourself away and brood over coin. What you should do," he continued, "is reach out to other dwarven houses and to the people of Lake Town. Build defenses and weapons. We face dangers yet. Orcs could appear any day. We must unite and prepare." Thorin's face flickered as if the last threads of reason were tugged at, but greed snapped them back. You are not welcome here. Leave. Gandalf's beard trembled with indignation. Before he could answer, Duir's voice cut in. He had ridden his flying broomstick up before the wall, and now looked down at Thorin with cool contempt. You promised, Thorin Oakenshield, once I helped you reclaim the mountain, 1/10 of the treasure would be mine. I have dealt with the dragon, Duir said. I enabled you to retake your home. When will you pay what you promised? Thorin's pupils tightened. He glared at Duir. Smaug, a great shadow in the distance, answered with a low, rumbling roar that brought a flash of reason back to Thorin. He swallowed and, with a face that looked as if it hurt to form words, said through clenched teeth, I promise, after the Arkenstone is found, you will have 1/10 of the hoard. Duir only narrowed his eyes. And if the Arkenstone isn't found, or if it is found and you keep it hidden, do you intend then to deny payment? Thorin's expression grew black. No, I gave you my word. But you promised to help me reclaim the mountain. If you wish a share of the hoard, you must help find the Arkenstone. Duir chuckled, and a contract slid from his pocket, floating before Thorin. I think you misremember, Thorin Oakenshield. The contract requires me to help you reclaim the Lonely Mountain. It does not require me to help find the Arkenstone. That condition is additional and not part of our agreement. He tapped the parchment. Besides, Smaug burned much in the treasury earlier. Who knows whether the Arkenstone wasn't reduced to ashes? I have fulfilled my part. Now honor yours. Thorin's face darkened. Give me 1 month, he said. In 1 month, Duir replied coldly, I will place your share before you. Every piece, not 1 coin less. I hope you will keep your word. He turned to Bilbo, who had been watching from nearby. Bilbo, would you like to come with Gandalf and me? Bilbo looked from Thorin's sullen figure to Duir's calm face. He hesitated, and then nodded. Duir landed and reached to lift Bilbo onto the broom. Don't go, Thorin's voice cut through the air. Duir's hand paused. He looked up, expression hardening. Do you object? You may go, but first prove you have taken nothing that belongs to the mountain, Thorin demanded, suspicion lacing his words as he stared at Bilbo. A sudden pressure from Duir made the air around Thorin shimmer. Thorin Oakenshield, Duir said, with more cold than courtesy, am I giving you too much leeway, that you must accuse my friend? The air tightened like a vice. Thorin, white-knuckled, ground out, if he has nothing to hide, why refuse inspection? Is the Arkenstone hidden on him? Duir's hand came for his wand, but Bilbo stopped him. Calm, if anxious, Bilbo stepped forward. Duir, that's all right. If he suspects me, let him search. It's better to end this now. Duir snorted and released Thorin. The suffocating pressure eased. Thorin's gaze on Duir was wary and edged with fear. Bilbo emptied his pockets one by one, showing nothing hidden. Then, with a small shake of disappointment in his face, he opened his enchanted money pouch. The pouch spilled out a heap of coin and trinkets, gems, gold, and silver, the spoils Duir had recovered in the goblin caves. They clattered into a little mound at Thorin's feet. Greed flashed in Thorin's eyes. For a moment, dragon sickness nearly overcame him. He seemed to want to sweep the pile into his hands and flee. But Smaug's distant gaze and Duir's presence kept the worst of it in check. Duir, with a sneer, pointed at the pile. Search them. If you find anything from your mountain, take it. If you do not, put each piece back into the pouch and return it to Bilbo. Thorin searched and, of course, found nothing of the Arkenstone. Under Duir's pressure, and far too humiliated to refuse further, he obeyed, carefully, angrily returning each coin and trinket into Bilbo's pouch. When that was done, Duir took Bilbo and left the city wall, flying toward Gandalf. Welcome back, Bilbo, Gandalf said with a weary half-smile. He had watched the altercation and felt a deep disappointment in Thorin. The Thorin before him was no longer the reasonable, noble leader he had hoped for. He was stubborn, consumed by an obsession with the Horde. Gandalf also felt a priv guilt. Had his counsel and involvement led Thorin to this point? Still, he knew that Thorin's drive to reclaim the mountain would have led him there, one way or another. The three of them left the lonely mountain and flew toward Riverdale. Bilbo rode Smaug for the first time and could not contain his excitement, flushed and delighted despite the confrontation on the wall. After a while, he remembered something and blurted out, Duir, about that mandrake you lent me. I searched the whole treasury and couldn't find it. Could it have been burned in the fire? Duir laughed softly. I forgot to tell you, I retrieved it long ago, and Asio took care of it. Relief washed over Bilbo. Oh, thank goodness, I thought I'd lost it. Chapter 110, Deformation. After leaving the Lonely Mountain, Dewey and his two companions put in at River Valley City to rest. Smaug was too large to keep with them, so Dewey let the dragon hunt in the great wilderness near the mountain, ready to summon him if needed. Many of River Valley City's buildings had been gutted by dragonfire. Even if Dewey wanted to restore them, he could not. The three of them returned to the house they had used before. Its hearth was still linked to Rivendell, the connection Dewey had left intact. Gandalf, restless and busy, took only a short break before setting off to find Bard. He planned to persuade Bard to lead the people of Lake Town to River Valley City. River Valley City was defensible and backed by the Lonely Mountain. Once the orcs attacked, the city could quickly unite with the dwarves and form a force capable of resisting the invaders. Lake Town, by contrast, lay exposed on open water with no defenses. If the orcs struck there, there would be nowhere for its people to hide. Gandalf wanted the relocation done fast, and if he could, he hoped to bring Thranduil and the Elves into an alliance against the orcs. After subduing Smaug, Dewey and Gandalf had questioned the dragon about any collusion with the orcs. Smaug had no reason to lie. He told them the orcs had tried to court him long before Azog's time, but the dragon had no interest in ruling Middle-earth, only in guarding his hoard, so he refused. Recently, however, Azog's son Bolg had made contact. Bolg had informed Smaug of Thorin Oakenshield's plan to reclaim the Lonely Mountain and use that as leverage to secure an alliance. Smaug would allow Bolg's orcs into the mountain's territory and let them advance north to reclaim Angmar. In return, the orcs would recognize Smaug's dominion over the mountain and give him half the spoils of their campaigns. Now that Smaug had been neutralized and word would spread, Bolg would not remain idle. A major assault to seize the Lonely Mountain and its strategic position in the north seemed inevitable. While Gandalf prepared for war, Dewey had another task on his mind. At dawn one morning, he pressed his wand to his chest and spoke the words as he always did. Amato, Animo, Animato, Animagus. The incantation finished, and for a moment, he felt a second heartbeat inside his chest, a faint echo of his own, a duet of pulses. It felt like a sign of success. He pulled out the palantir and checked the weather at the high pass. Dark clouds and lightning roiled over the misty mountains. He left Bilbo behind in River Valley City, teleported to Rivendell via the hearth, then mounted his flying broom and headed for the pass. The high pass received battering rain and strobe-like forks of lightning. Dewey hugged the ridges on his broom, flying low to avoid being struck. He went straight to the spot where he had buried the tiny crystal vial and dug it up. The potion inside had turned blood red. He scarcely hesitated. With the vial in hand, he raced back to Rivendell. Only one final step remained in his animagus transfiguration. Back in Rivendell, Dewey did not return to River Valley City through the fireplace. He needed a large, undisturbed space for the transfiguration. Elrond, recently returned from Lorien, greeted him with a smile. "Duir, was your journey smooth?" he asked. Dewey nodded and made his request. "Lord Elrond, could you show me a chamber where no one will disturb me? I must be certain nothing goes wrong." Elrond was curious as well as obliging. Until now, only skin changers had accomplished animal transformation. A wizard mastering human transfiguration into an animal was unprecedented. Elrond led him to an austere hall. No tables, only two fireplaces set between pillars, each burning with a steady, fierce flame, though no wood lay in them. Mysterious elven runes were carved into the marble floor. The air hummed with a serene power. When Dewey stepped inside, his mind cleared. "This is the Hall of Flames," Elrond explained. "When I need stillness for thought and meditation, I come here. You may perform your transfiguration here. No one will disturb you." Grateful, Dewey set to work. He pressed his wand once more to his heart and intoned, "Amato, Animo, Animato, Animagus." Then he uncorked the vial and swallowed the red potion in one draught. The twin heartbeats swelled and thundered through his chest. The sound echoed in the empty hall. Pain followed, sharp and reshaping, burning like a curse. An image of an animal formed in his mind and grew vivid. He yielded to the change. His body shrank, his clothing and jewelry melted into his skin and fur. When the agony subsided, only a massive owl remained on the marble floor. It was a Eurasian eagle owl, the large, tufted head with ear tufts, mottled yellow and black plumage, huge golden eyes that glinted with a cold sharpness. The hooked beak and powerful talons were armed like blades. This owl was larger than any ordinary specimen, a full meter tall, with a wingspan over 3 meters. Dewey, now the owl, looked at his reflection on the polished floor and thought wryly, "So my animagus matches my Patronus. Not the raptor I had fancied, but an owl would do." Night vision, acute hearing, stealth, and silent flight, these were valuable gifts. But transformation did not mean immediate mastery. He flapped and stumbled, shedding feathers on the marble as he repeatedly tried to launch himself. It took countless attempts before he finally rose into the hall's high air, and once aloft he found the difference from broom flying striking. The feel of wind over feathers, the subtle balancing of tail and wing, was wholly new. The hall felt too small. He slipped through an open window and circled over Rivendell, savoring the view. Below, on an observation deck, Elrond watched and smiled. When the owl had taken enough, it dropped down, transformed back into Dewey on landing, and Dewey bowed to Elrond. "Thank you, Lord Elrond. Without this place, I doubt I would have succeeded so quickly," he said. Elrond waved him off. "You did the work. I only provided the space. How fared your mission at the Lonely Mountain?" Dewey told him everything. Elrond listened, astonishment gradually replacing curiosity. Since dragons were first wrought by Morgoth, no one had ever subdued one. Morgoth himself had been the only one with such power. Not even Sauron had achieved it. That a wizard had managed to bring Smaug low was almost inconceivable. At first, Elrond suspected deception, but when he learned of the unbreakable vow and that Gandalf had witnessed the contract, he was reassured. He agreed to aid in healing the dragon's wounds. Dewey did not linger. Though he had succeeded in performing animagus transfiguration, the change was still new and dependent on his wand. Masters like Professor McGonagall could shift without one, and could even bind their wands into themselves. Dewey needed practice until transformation became second nature. So he transformed into an owl again and flew east across the misty mountains to test himself. He saw traces of trolls, orcs, and wargs along the ridges, but he pressed on until he came over the eastern slopes and encountered the great eagles. One of them wheeled close, talons tucked, feathers ruffling with curiosity. Dewey braced himself and was about to change back when the eagle spoke, circling him. "What are you?" the eagle asked, its voice resonant and cautious. "You look like an owl, but you do not smell like one. You carry the scent of a man." Duir let out a long breath as soon as he saw that the Eagle King had no intention of attacking him. Relief turned quickly into astonishment. "You can talk?" he blurted. "Or, can I understand you?" A strange light flickered in the eagle's sharp eyes. "I am a messenger of Manwë, king of the Valar, and lord of the birds. Of course I can speak and be understood by those who fly." "You smell of humans, yet you look like an owl. What are you?" The Eagle King's expression softened into an almost rueful amusement. "I am not an object," he said, then corrected himself with a reluctant chuckle. "I am what I am." Duir, feeling his mind still a little slowed by his recent change into a bird, hurried to explain. "I am Duir, a wizard. You once carried Gandalf and me across the misty mountains. Do you remember?" Recognition flashed across the Eagle King's face. "Of course. You were the wizard with Gandalf. I remember you. Wasn't it you who slew Azog, the orc chief?" "That was me," Duir nodded. "So why do you take this owl shape now? I thought you were human before." "It's an animagus transformation," Duir answered. "A kind of magic change." "That sounds like what the skin changers do," the Eagle King mused. Once the Eagle King realized Duir could take avian form and speak with them, he invited him to their nest out of curiosity and hospitality. Their dwellings sat on a broad, rocky shelf on a cliff not far from the High Pass and Goblin Town. Giant nests woven from thick, gnarled branches, lined with finer twigs and feathers, cushioned even with whole warg pelts. Landing among them, Duir felt oddly dwarfed by the scale. He stood in a world of greater birds, watched with keen, intelligent eyes. The Eagle Kings already understood Elvish and the tongues of men, though they rarely conversed. Meeting Duir, a wizard who could become an owl and speak their language, they were eager and welcoming. They set before him fruits of the misty mountains and even presented a half-dead warg as a delicacy. Their hospitality was warm to the point of overwhelming. Among the larger nestlings, fledglings already somewhere the size of Duir, one caught his attention. It was weak, its chirps faint beside the harsh cries of its siblings. It could not push for food, and its parents seemed indifferent, doing nothing special to help it. Nature was harsh. Duir knew how frequently the weak were cast aside or worse. But these were the Eagle Kings, wise, ancient beings. Would they truly abandon one of their young? The Eagle King read his thoughts and sighed. We dwell in the misty mountains, Duir. Every day we battle wargs, orcs, and other dangers. Only the strong survive here. The weak are often lost. Sometimes an early return to the halls of Manwë is kinder than a life of suffering. He turned his gaze toward Duir. But if you have compassion, you could take this one with you. Give it a chance, another life. Take it? Duir stared. The idea of being given a child like that seemed impossible. The parents made no objection, however, and the chick itself had a fierce, hungry look in its eyes. Duir changed back into his human form, took a piece of dried meat from his pouch, and offered it to the little eagle. Though less than 3 years old, Eagle Kings matured slowly. The chick clearly understood. It lunged for the meat with starved urgency, snapped it down before its siblings could snatch it, then looked from Duir to its parents and back again. It nodded as if making a decision. Duir found himself unable to refuse. He used an undetectable extension charm on his coin purse, expanding its interior into a hollow space almost 10 meters across, the extent of the charm he could safely cast. It would be enough for the chick to live in. Along with the chick, the Eagle King gifted him an old nest built of perfumed wood, the very nest the king claimed to have hatched in, plus feathers, warg pelts, and some eggshell fragments from the brood. The feathers could be made into wand cores, the eggshells might be brewed into rare potions, the warg skins, if nothing else, would make useful cushions. The parents watched without protest. After a brief farewell, Duir shifted once more into the shape of a Eurasian eagle owl, lifted the expanded purse and the nest, and flew eastward. Inside the coin purse, the chick promptly began to bury its head in food. After a life of near starvation, that was all it could think about. It paid no mind to sorrow or abandonment. For it, a full belly was the only concern. Duir did not fly directly to the lonely mountain. Instead, he circled briefly above a small clearing and descended toward Bjorn's house. Bjorn noticed the unusual bird in the sky and went to see what it was. When the owl landed and then transformed into a man, Bjorn's wariness vanished, and his face broke into a broad grin. Duir, it's been too long. Bjorn's voice rumbled like a bear's. You were in animal shape just now? Duir asked, grinning back. If all skin changers turned into giant bears, I'd have thought you kin. Good to see you, Bjorn replied. I only recently mastered my animal form. I can turn into a bear, but it isn't as fancy as your transformations. Duir laughed. Flying seems better than running to me. Would that I could fly, Bjorn admitted enviously. A flying animal would be far grander than a clumsy bear. Bjorn invited Duir in, and Duir accepted. He had come both to pay his respects and to ask a favor. He wanted to learn about skin changer transformation, to see if there was any clue that might help him evolve his animagus beyond an owl. He dreamed, faintly and perhaps foolishly, of reaching toward great avian forms, a phoenix, a thunderbird, beings that carried far more than mere wings. A phoenix's rebirth or a thunderbird's command of storms would make a wizard's power altogether different. Even if such transformations seemed unlikely, the possibility was tempting. He told Bjorn everything that had happened since they last met, the news of Thorin's madness from dragon sickness, the tattered state of the dwarves, the dragon he had bound. Bjorn snorted. Those dwarves and their greed, he said. If the treasure was tainted, they should have trusted less. Reaping what is sown, that's all. But Bjorn's attention sharpened when Duir mentioned the dragon. You truly tamed a dragon, he asked, incredulous and impressed. Duir nodded. Bjorn's eyes gleamed. Remarkable. You'll have a fine name in Middle-earth for that. Dragonbinder, Smaug's master, perhaps Dragon Knight. He delighted in imagining titles for Duir, while Duir steered the conversation back to skin changing. How do you do it? Duir asked. Is it a skill you learn or something in the blood? Bjorn shook his head. It's in our line. We are skin changers by the blood of our ancestors. There is a tale. Some say our forebears lived among men in the misty mountains and were blessed by the spirits of the wild. For us, the shift comes with time. It wakes at a certain age, like a calling. I can't explain it more than that." Duir had expected as much, but he asked Bjorn for one thing more. Would he change now so Duir could observe? Bjorn agreed. There was, however, a practicality. When Bjorn transformed, his clothing became part of his flesh. He had to remove his garments first, for they would be destroyed in the shift. Duir did his best to avert his eyes as Bjorn stripped. "For research," he muttered to himself, and internally regretted the effort. Bjorn's face climbed with strain as he gathered emotion and strength. His breathing grew heavy, his muscles tensed, veins stood out on his brow. A low, angry sound rose in his chest. Then his body swelled, widened, and black hair sprouted, thick and bristling. When the change completed, a black bear the size of a small house stood in the room, shaking itself like a mountain uprooted. Duir stared, part scientific interest, part stunned admiration, at the enormous creature that had been his friend a moment before. Chapter 112, Magic Cycle. When Bjorn shifted into the giant bear, a raw, primeval weight filled the room. Even knowing the bear was Bjorn didn't remove the instinct to recoil. Dewey forced himself forward. "Don't struggle," he said quietly. "May I examine the way magic flows through you when you're like this?" The bear rumbled assent. Dewey pressed his hand to the thick fur and began to channel a little of his own magic into Bjorn, letting it trace the currents inside the creature. Animagi never turn into true magical beasts because a wizard's internal magic operates fundamentally differently from a creature's. Forcing one system into the other breaks the balance. At best, the magic becomes chaotic and a wizard goes squib. At worst, they transform irreversibly into a beast, their mind trapped in an animal body. The quintuped, legend said, was born that way, a failed transformation that created a new species. In the modern age, only a handful of wizards have ever become registered animagi. Attempts to become actual magical creatures were almost non-existent for fear of catastrophe. Bjorn was different. Dewey felt the bear's magic running strong and strange. He could map the differences between that circulation and his own, and his face grew steadily more serious. The bear's network was not a distorted version of a wizard's channeling. It was an entirely separate system. What was more astonishing, and what really took Dewey's breath away, was that Bjorn possessed both systems. In human form, one pattern governed his flow of magic. In bear form, another took over. He could switch between them at will. Dewey drew his hand back and let out a long, hard breath. "There's a lot here," he told Bjorn when the bear once more assumed his human shape and pulled his clothes on. "Your circulation is unique. If I could reproduce it precisely, if I could find the point where you switch systems, then maybe we could discover how a skin changer changes and perhaps learn something that would let animagi become more robust. But your system is terribly complex. To record it thoroughly would take years, maybe longer, and it has to be exact. Any mistake in copying it could cause a grave magical accident." Bjorn waved off the concern with a plain look. "You're welcome to study me when you like," he said. "You can stay here forever if you want. I'm here all the time." Dewey had expected a very different reaction. The way a skin changer's power worked was the foundation of his people's safety and identity. An outsider deciphering it could be a devastating threat. Bjorn's trust stunned him, and he resolved to repay it. "You have magic inside you," Dewey said after a moment. "I'd like to make you a wand." Bjorn's eyebrows rose. "A wand? For me? Will it even work?" Dewey smiled. "If there's magic in you, a wand will work. Try mine." He handed Bjorn his wand and walked the enormous man through the simplest incantation he knew, the little light spell. The wand didn't feel perfectly suited in Bjorn's hands, but when the tip glowed pale and steady, the smile that spread across the skin changer's face was childlike and immediate. "Make me one," Bjorn said, all eagerness. "Please." Dewey had already planned to, but wand making required the right materials. He tried cores he had available, Galadriel's hair, eagle feather, but neither was compatible with Bjorn. Then Bjorn produced something else, a warg he had killed the day before. From the warg came a heartstring that fit Bjorn's magic. For the wand wood, Dewey rode a broom to Mirkwood and took a length of heartwood from an ancient oak. With heartstring and oak ready, he could craft Bjorn a proper wand, but not here and not that night. River Valley City was in the north now, and the threat of the orc army made Dewey anxious. He had been away from the city longer than he had meant to. He didn't know whether or not the orcs or the dragon had made any new moves. "Come with me to River Valley City," he told Bjorn. "We can make your wand there, and, well, we could use you." Bjorn needed no persuasion. The orcs had slaughtered his kin. He hated them the way the rest of them did. Once the signs of a fight were mentioned, he was ready to go. They settled the livestock and stepped into a bowl of green fireplace flames. With the flue powder's familiar whoosh, Dewey found himself out in the River Valley City hearth. Next instant, a massive figure stumbled through behind him, coughing up soot so fiercely that tears came to his eyes as he straightened. Dewey laughed and brushed soot from Bjorn's shoulders. "You all right?" "Cough, cough, fine," Bjorn said, wiping his face with a paw the size of a skillet. Bilbo, drawn by the noise, hurried over and lit up at the sight of his returning friend. "Dewey and Mr. Bjorn, how did you come together?" "Long time no see, Mr. Baggins," Bjorn rumbled politely. Dewey explained that Bjorn was a guest he had invited to help against the orcs. "Where's Gandalf?" Bilbo asked. "Hasn't he come back yet?" "No," Bilbo answered. "Bard and the people of Lake Town have moved in here, but Gandalf hasn't returned. He went to Mirkwood to talk to the elves, hoping to win their aid." Dewey's mouth tightened. He did not expect Thranduil to be eager to join an alliance with humans and dwarves. Still, it was worth the attempt. "What are Bard and the others doing now?" he asked. "Working," Bilbo said. "They're repairing the walls, filling the breaches so the orcs can't get in." They found Bard by the gate, hauling and fitting stones into the ruined battlements. He attacked each boulder as if he would wring blood from stone, and when he saw Dewey and the others, he pushed his hands to his hips and grinned with relief. "Dewey, I heard you'd gone far away. I'm glad you've come back." "I'll help," Dewey said. He drew his wand and, with a short, practiced motion and a word, reparo, he sent the magic into the masonry. The air around them seemed to shiver backwards. Rubble jumped up and slid together, fissures knitting closed like a wound healing from the edges. The gaps in the wall closed one after another, stone rearranging to its old places. Only the stretches scorched black by dragonfire resisted the spell. Reparo could not resurrect what had been burned away. Men and women stopped and stared as Dewey worked. Bjorn set to hauling the heaviest stones with hands that crushed the earth beneath them, and Bard barked orders that moved people into efficient positions. For a few hours, the grim rhythm of repair swallowed the fear that had lived in River Valley City for days. The city would be better prepared when the orcs arrived. As the last of the usable gaps was filled, Dewey made a mental note of the watchtowers and of where they would need extra provisions. He had found a place to study Bjorn's magic and a promising ally against the coming storm. A long road still lay ahead, but for the moment the city's heart beat steadier. Chapter 113, Elf Army. The city wall, which had been little more than a jagged ruin, now stood largely whole again. Everyone present stared in stunned silence. Only Bilbo, who had seen Duir's power before, wore a satisfied, almost proud smile. Duir did not stop. Wand in hand, he walked through the streets, and wherever he waved, damaged roofs knitted themselves back together, splintered beams realigned, and collapsed houses rose as though time were being reversed. The city's few thousand survivors watched him with a growing, breathless awe. When the last of the major repairs were done, Duir lowered his wand and exhaled. "It's finally habitable," he said. River Valley City was still scarred and far from perfect, but many houses that had survived the dragon's fire were now fully restored. People who had been living in tents could move indoors again. Bard, emotions raw with relief and gratitude, bowed deeply to Duir. "I can't begin to tell you how grateful we are, black-robed wizard Duir. What you've done will save us." Duir waved a hand. "I'm glad to help. But my magic can't fill all the gaps in the wall," he added. "You'll have to finish some of that yourselves." Bard shook his head. "It's already more than enough." "Perhaps I can help," a deep voice rumbled. Bard turned and frowned in surprise. "Who is this?" "This is Bjorn," Duir said. "He lives west of Mirkwood near the Anduin. He's the ally I invited to help against the orcs." Bjorn shrugged off his coat and with a few easy motions became a bear the height of the city wall. The sheer size and presence of the creature drew startled cries from the crowd, which quickly turned to relieved wonder when the bear did not attack. Bard's astonishment deepened. Anyone trusted by Duir had to be extraordinary. The bear easily hauled enormous stones and set them into the gaps, placing them with patient precision. Bard clapped his hands and organized the townsfolk alongside Bjorn to finish the wall. Duir stayed out of it, returning to his lodgings to make more wands. Bilbo remained, doing whatever small tasks he could. Time moved quickly. Not long after, Duir presented Bjorn with a wand he had finished making. Warg heartstring core, oak shaft, 16 inches long, he said with a pleased look. This is the longest wand I've ever made, nearly staff length. Bjorn accepted it with the careful excitement of someone trying something new. He waved it, and to everyone's astonishment, the wand sprouted fine branches, burst into blossom, and bore a perfect acorn. Bjorn plucked the nut, feeling the pulse of life in it, and slipped it into his pouch to plant in his garden. Duir could not hide his satisfaction. He felt, in that moment, like Ollivander watching a wand find its true owner. "Thank you, Duir," Bjorn rumbled, gently stroking the wand. Duir only smiled and waved it off. "We are friends, aren't we?" "Yes, we are friends." Duir then taught Born a few simple spells. Watching Born easily cast Incendio and Aguamenti, Duir found himself oddly proud, like a wizard in a classroom imagining he might make a good professor at Hogwarts. After the lesson, Duir reached into a money pouch and drew out something else, a giant eagle chick, peeping helplessly. "Is that a young giant eagle?" Bjorn and Bilbo exclaimed, their eyes widening. Duir shook his head at the suggestion that he'd stolen it. "The Eagle King entrusted him to me," he said. Both men relaxed. Bjorn admitted he had feared Duir had stolen the bird. The great eagles were not to be trifled with. Duir examined the chick with his wand and frowned. It was underdeveloped. Always he the weakest in the nest and starved of competition. No wonder the Eagle clan had left it behind. It would likely have died of weakness unless rescued. "Poor little thing," Duir murmured. "I'll do my best to help him grow strong. Someday he'll fly like the others." The chick, who was shrunken and weak but alert, chirped in answer, as if it understood. Duir pulled from another bag the last bottle of a soothing potion and offered it. The chick, surprisingly intelligent and quick to learn, opened its beak and drank the bitter draught without protest. The potion worked fast. The chick brightened, its down fluffier and its voice stronger. It looked up at Duir with an affectionate, almost grateful gaze. Bjorn and the others watched happily. "It seems he's taken to you, Duir. You have a giant eagle companion." Duir smiled broadly. He would need to make more potions. Blood restoratives, recovery draughts, to mend the chick's congenital frailty, and some ingredients would be hard to find here. He made a mental note to seek Radagast's counsel on herbology and substitutes. "Have you named him?" Bilbo asked, peering at the chick that already towered over him. Duir considered. "Thorondor," he said. "I hope he may inherit the name of his ancestor and one day soar like them." Bjorn's brows rose. Thorondor was the first great eagle, a hero who had aided the Valar and the Elves in ages past, an enormous, storied name for such a sickly thing. But the chick hopped about without any sense of blown expectations, and Duir, as if not to let the little creature be lonely, entrusted Thorondor's care to Bilbo. Bilbo delighted in the responsibility, buying meat in generous quantities from Lake Town to feed the ever-growing appetite of his charge. He fussed over Thorondor with more diligence than Duir himself. With the chick in Bilbo's charge, Duir turned inward. He took up the Book of Abraham, a dense grimoire full of alchemical runes and the legendary instructions for the Philosopher's Stone. Even with Nicholas Flamel's notes, the stone's chapter was impenetrable. Duir had never studied alchemy, and though he had been learning runes since he signed in and had the rune dictionary, alchemical theory was another realm. He began at the beginning, working through basic alchemical principles and relying on his rune studies as a foundation. Before Duir could progress far, Gandalf returned, accompanied by King Thranduil and an elven army. The elves, resplendent in gold armor and rigidly disciplined, lined the approach to River Valley City. Thranduil rode at the front on an enormous stag, antlers wide as gates. Duir turned to Gandalf. "Did you persuade Thranduil?" Gandalf gave a wry smile. Not quite. Thranduil's as stubborn as a dwarf. He came to claim a white gem necklace, something the dwarves kept. He says it belonged to his late queen. He brought an army for a necklace? Bard blurted, incredulous. Gandalf shrugged. It matters to him. The good news is Thranduil has agreed to ally with the people of Lake Town, and he brought provisions to see them through the winter. Bard's face brightened. The supplies were the answer to his secret fear of famine through the cold months. He led a welcoming party out of the city. Your Majesty Thranduil, Bard said, surprised but warm. We did not expect you. Thranduil dismounted with regal ease. I heard assistance was needed. I brought supplies, he said, and his troops rolled forward carts laden with grain, cured meat, and vegetables. The stores were more than enough for winter. The relief among the townsfolk was audible. Bard opened his thanks, then fell silent when Thranduil added, I did not come merely to help you. I came to reclaim what was taken from me. Bard held his tongue, but welcomed the elves into River Valley City. Thranduil surveyed the rebuilt walls with a raised eyebrow. This city was ruined by the dragon. When did you find such craftsmen that you rebuilt the walls in days? Bard took pride in his answer. It was thanks to wizard Duir. His magic is miraculous. He restored entire buildings, and Beorn aided us in bear form, moving the stones. Thranduil drew nearer. Ahead, Duir stood among the others. Majesty, Duir said, smiling. Good to see you again. Thranduil regarded him openly, admiration in his eyes. The dragon tamer, Duir. The name reaches even Mirkwood, he said, dismounting to speak to the man everyone now knew as the wizard who had faced Smaug. Thranduil's praise brought a modest smile to Dewey's face. Your Majesty, you flatter me, he replied quietly. This is not my doing alone. Thranduil's smile widened. By the way, where is Prince Legolas? I haven't seen him. At the mention of his favored son, Thranduil brightened. He found orc tracks and has gone after them. Gandalf's face grew grave. Do you know where these orcs came from? They showed up in the northern reaches of Mirkwood, Thranduil said casually. They seem to have come from the northern Misty Mountains. Legolas took after them. He's worried. He should return in a few days. Outside affairs rarely roused the king of the woodland realm. He had come to the river port only to collect the white sapphire necklace he had commissioned for his late queen. He had never lent aid when Smaug struck the lonely mountain, and he had no intention of intervening now. Legolas, however, thought differently. The prince's heart was kinder and more open to alliance. Despite past grievances between dwarves and elves, Legolas believed that with a common enemy like the orcs, old slights should be set aside. So he tracked the orcs, hoping to find their stronghold. Thranduil would not linger in the Riverlands. After a short respite for his forces, he intended to press toward the lonely mountain. Gandalf tried once more to dissuade him. Your Majesty, the orcs could strike at any moment. Pressing your quarrel with Thorin Oakenshield now will only give them their advantage. Thranduil raised a hand and stopped him. I have made my decision. When Thorin returns what belonged to my late wife, I will turn my army home at once. Not a day longer. There was a thin edge of sarcasm in his voice. Do you truly believe Thorin will agree? The sickness of dragon greed runs in their line. I saw it in Thror. I do not expect Thorin to be any different. The white sapphire was no Arkenstone, but it was still worth a fortune, and it had once been taken in Thror's greed when dragon sickness first fell on the line of Durin. That theft had poisoned relations between the elves of Mirkwood and the dwarves of Erebor, and it had been part of why the elves did not aid the lonely mountain when Smaug came. Gandalf sighed, worrying that Thorin, likely still clouded by dragon-tinged avarice, would refuse to give anything, perhaps not even a single coin. Worse, Thranduil was not the only claimant. Bard of Lake Town also intended to press Thorin for compensation for his people's losses. As a descendant of Girion, lord of the ruined river town, he had a rightful share of the treasure. Bard did not want a needless war between men, elves, and dwarves, so he asked Thranduil to let him negotiate. Thranduil, skeptical but not unwilling to delay, agreed, while keeping his army ready should talks fail. Gandalf, anxious to avert bloodshed, accompanied Bard to try to persuade Thorin. Dewey did not go with them. He took out the Palantir and first checked on Smaug. He hadn't watched the dragon closely of late and wanted to know where he had been roaming. High above the desolation, north of Erebor, Smaug killed a wild ox and torched it with his heat. A single ox would serve a dragon for a meal. Dragons could also endure long fasts when deep in slumber. Lately, Smaug had considered flight and escape at every chance, but each time the thought crossed him, the unbreakable oath carved across his throat flared with burning, constricting pain. It was as if iron fingers tightened into his sinew, and the old dragon learned, through torment, to accept the leash upon him. He hunted only when summoned and otherwise endured. As he finished his meat, Smaug stiffened, sensing a watchful presence. "Master?" he rumbled, tentative and uncertain. One of the oath markings along his neck heated and tugged, Dewey's summons. Smaug swallowed his last mouthful and rushed north as fast as he could. His wings were not yet whole, so he had to run. Dewey watched the dragon's hurried movement in the crystal sphere and snorted. He knew how many times Smaug had flirted with rebellion, and how often the oath had punished him for it. Each attempt at flight brought fresh pain. Each fresh pain recalibrated the dragon's obedience. Now, with Smaug obediently coming, Dewey turned his attention elsewhere. He scanned the carnage rising from Mount Gundabad. Bolg, the new orc king, had thrown open his gates. Trolls, orcs, wargs, and even immense bats spilled from the mountain fortress in a dark tide, blotting the sun. The army was tens of thousands strong, advancing toward the lonely mountain. Dewey blinked. Legolas and Tauriel were in the vision, hidden behind a boulder within Gundabad's walls, watching the orc host through narrowed eyes. Legolas suddenly shivered and scanned the sky as if feeling eyes on him. "Are you all right, Legolas?" Tauriel asked softly. He shook his head. "I just feel watched." "Too sensitive, that one," Dewey murmured with a hint of amusement, then flicked his attention east of Erebor. The Iron Hills lay there, Danesek Ironfoot's realm. Thorin and his company were few against a constellation of foes. If they meant to stand, they would need aid from Dane. As if in answer, a vast host of dwarves set up upon the eastern ridgelines, marching toward the lonely mountain. The stage was set for the gathering of the 5 armies. Dewey closed the palantir. "Beorn, Bilbo, come with me to the gate of Erebor. The orcs are on the move. We cannot allow them to begin the slaughter." Beorn's eyes brightened at the news. Finally. Bilbo felt a nervous thrill and tightened his grip on his short elven blade. Dewey handed Beorn a flying broomstick. "Take Bilbo behind you. I'll move out first." With that, he shifted his shape into a great horned owl and shot ahead toward the lonely mountain's gate. Beorn had already learned to handle broomstick travel a few days earlier. Dewey trusted him to ferry Bilbo safely. At the gate, tension crackled like a drawn string. Thorin refused Thranduil's demand for the white sapphire and would not consent to dividing the treasure with Bard. Gandalf stood between them, pressing reason on a stubborn company and a proud king. "Thorin, lay down your arms. Open the gate. That horde will be your undoing," he urged. "You cannot win this. Do not doom those who have trusted you." Thorin's eyes flashed, but his face hardened. "Enough, Gandalf. Spare me your counsel. You cannot rouse one who will not wake." Thranduil, mounted on a towering stag and clad in full armor, rode forward with a contemptuous smile. "Now choose, Thorin Oakenshield," he called. "Peace or war?" Thorin paced the battlements, glancing east as if awaiting relief. Then a raven circled and dropped to the wall. At once Thorin's chest swelled with new confidence. He faced down to Thranduil with a voice like iron. "I choose war." Thranduil, taken aback for an instant, twisted his head east, sensing more than seeing. On the ridgelines of the Iron Hills, a vast dwarf army marched into sight and took up position. "Alert!" he ordered. The elven ranks leveled their spears toward the approaching dwarves. The Iron Hill host strode forward in iron-clad columns until they stood within 1,000 paces. Dane, too, Ironfoot, rode at their head, a broad-shouldered figure atop a massive war-pig, hammer in hand. "Good morning," Dane boomed, his voice carrying across the plain. He swung his hammer lightly. "If I may make a small request, would you please roll as far away as possible?" Chapter 115, Battle of the 5 Armies. "All of you, get out now!" Dane Ironfoot's roar cut across the plain like a hammerfall, proud, furious, intolerant. Gandalf stepped forward from among the elven ranks and called up to him. "Lord Dane, may I say a word?" Dane narrowed his eyes at the gray-robed wizard. "Gray-cloaked Gandalf? Speak then." His voice was heavy with contempt. Tell these rabble to clear out at once, or I'll water the earth with their blood. There should not be a war between dwarves, men, and elves, Gandalf said, solemn. There is an orc army approaching Erebor. Put down your grudges. Your weapons should be pointed together at the orcs. I will not yield to elves, Dain snarled, thrusting a finger toward Thranduil. Least of all that pointy-eared prince. If he steps between me and my king, I'll cut that pretty head of his clean off. See if he can smile then. Thranduil's laugh was cold as winter. He stared at Dain as if looking at something dead. Dain, wait! Dain ignored him. He turned and began to marshal his troops for battle. Did you hear that, warriors? Let's teach those pointy-eared bastards a lesson, he roared. A horn blared. The dwarf lines surged down the slope. Archers, King Thranduil ordered, and the woodland realm's bowmen drew and loosed. Tens of thousands of arrows fell like a black rain on the dwarf charge. Then, strangely, a huge horned owl fell from the sky into the storm of shafts. As it swooped, it blurred and unfolded until, in a flash, the owl became a man. He, Duir, waved a slender wand, and the arrows, meeting his magic, seemed to bloom into petals. The storm of shafts turned into a drifting shower of flowers. The newcomer floated down between the dwarf and elven ranks, as light as a feather. The dwarves halted, suddenly uncertain. Dain's hand tightened on his axe. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I am Duir, black-robed wizard," the newcomer called in a voice that carried across the plain. "I am here to stop this needless slaughter. An orc host from Mount Gundabad approaches, several 100,000 strong. They will arrive within an hour or two. If you do not unite to meet them, you will be annihilated." Everyone stirred at that. The assembled elves, dwarves, and men numbered only in the tens of thousands. A force 10 times their size could, at best, crush them in short order. "How am I to believe you?" Dain's eyes narrowed. "I know you have ties to Gandalf. How do I know this isn't some trick to help the elves and those rabble-men?" Dewey gave a mirthless smile. "Believe me or not, your choice. I have no wish to prove anything to you." At that instant, a shadow blotted the sun. Bjorn thundered over on a flying broom, an odd sight to the Northmen, carrying Bilbo in his arms. He dropped to the field, changed into a colossal bear in a single motion, scooped Bilbo protectively into one huge paw, and let out a roar that sent Dain's war boar rearing back. The dwarves staggered, their charge broken. Dewey walked toward the elven and human lines. Gandalf hastened to his side. "Duir, have you really seen the orc host?" Dewey nodded. "I saw them through the Palantir." Gandalf's face darkened. "Several 100,000. This will be a terrible battle." More disconcerting to Gandalf was the sight of the elves sheathing their blades and preparing to withdraw. "Your Majesty Thranduil, why withdraw now, when the orcs are upon us?" he asked sharply. Thranduil's voice was ice. "This is a quarrel between orcs and dwarves. I must safeguard my people. Every elf of Mirkwood is precious. I will not squander them on a war that is not ours." "But if Erebor falls," Gandalf countered, "how long will Mirkwood stand? Do you expect the orcs to show mercy, or will you bend the knee to them?" "Do not bait me, Gandalf," Thranduil snapped. "I have watched the darkest days since Morgoth. I have lost kinsmen, and I have killed more orcs than there are trees in these woods. My people will only die defending their home, not as sacrifices for dwarves." Before Gandalf could answer, Dewey pointed toward the distant peaks. "Look." On the far mountains, black banners bloomed like wounds, and a low, throbbing roar rolled across the land. The ground itself began to move. Giant earthworms burst from the stone, tunneling through the mountain, and from their holes poured an unending stream of orcs, clamoring, swarming, spilling over the ridges. Wargs and trolls rode among them, dark as storms. In moments, the orcs had spread to encircle the gathered armies. "To arms!" Dain cried. Any thought of slaying elves abandoned, he wheeled his forces to meet the orcs. The first clash was brutal. The dwarves held their ground with iron discipline, but orcs pressed in overwhelming numbers. Screams and the clash of steel filled the air. Just as the dwarves began to stagger, the elves sprang back into action. A lethal rain of arrows fell among the orcs, felling countless of the enemy, yet the tunnels disgorged more and more of them. Bard and the men of Laketown joined as well, and Bjorn, still a bear, raced through the orc ranks, pawing them aside like insects. Gandalf, sword drawn, surveyed the hillside choked with darkness and looked to Dewey. "Where is your dragon? We need him." Dewey squinted into the distance and smiled. He's here. Far on the peak, a long shadow detached itself from the skyline. Smaug, the great dragon, rearing high and unleashing a thunderous roar. He tipped his head and fired a gout of crimson flame down the slopes. The roar and the blast stunned everyone into silence for a heartbeat. The orcs broke ranks in the panic, and the elves and dwarves ruthlessly pressed their advantage. "We cannot kill all of them. We must kill Bolg," Gandalf called, hacking down an orc as he spoke. "Strike at their leader, and the army will fragment." Dewey nodded. With a sweep of his wand, he cleared the nearest ring of orcs and wargs away. He drew the palantir and searched. "Found you," he murmured as Bolg's figure swam up in the crystal. Then the image vanished, as if snatched away. In its place, a red, demonic eye burned into the globe. Sauron's voice washed through the palantir, honeyed and venomous. It addressed him by name. "Black-robed wizard Duir, tamer of the dragon, your desires are plain. Cooperate with me, and I will teach you how to forge a ring of power for yourself. Immense might and unending life." A strand of Galadriel's hair on Dewey's wrist shivered and emitted a sudden, pure light. The glitter of that holy power snapped Dewey back to himself. For a breath, he had almost been tempted. He had not expected to meet Sauron so soon, or through the very seeing stone in his hand. Sauron, too, possessed a palantir, and through it he sought to seduce, to corrupt, to draw Duir into ruin, just as he had Saruman. Dewey did not answer. Instead, he cursed and produced the crystal phial Galadriel had entrusted to him. He let its contents flare, Arundel's light, bright and crystalline. The demonic eye recoiled, and the gaze in the palantir shrieked. For a moment, flames of holy brilliance burned across the crystal until the malignant presence was expelled. Only when he had scrutinized the palantir with the phial's light and found no remaining trace of trickery did Dewey relax. He tucked the seeing stone and the phial away together. Henceforth, he would never use the palantir without the countervailing luster of Arundel's light at hand. If Sauron could spy through the stone, then Dewey would be equally cautious. No more easy openings to the Dark Lord. He turned his attention back to the battle. Bolg, he had seen, hidden now, not on a command platform, but deep within a tunnel. He should strike at once. He looked at Bilbo, who was close by, glancing at his small elven blade. "Bilbo," Dewey said, "I'm going to the orc camp to find Bolg. This is no place for you. I'll take you up to Thorin and the others on the city wall." Bilbo shook his head stubbornly. "I can look after myself, Duir. I'll stay." Dewey hesitated, then relented. "Very well. Be careful." Even so, he wove several protective charms around the hobbit before mounting his flying broom. He had only gone a short distance when winged shadows, giant bats blotting the sun, dived from the dark. They swarmed at him in a mad, flapping cloud. "Avada," Dewey intoned, and his spells flew faster than the creatures. Bolts of green and silver lit the air. The bats fell like withered leaves. Chapter 116, Earthworm Attack. On the plain before Erebor, the elven host and the dwarf legions fought side by side. Centuries of rivalry had made them familiar with each other's tactics. They trusted one another's strengths and rotated through the lines with practiced efficiency. When the dwarves beat back the first surge of orcs, elven spears swept in to hold the ground. The two armies, old enemies turned allies for the day, carved a wedge through the darkness. Bjorn, in his bear form and full of a savage hatred for orckind, charged into the enemy ranks like a living battering ram. His thick fur and brute strength shrugged off blades. Where he crashed through, bodies followed. Above the chaos loomed Smaug. The dragon could not yet take to the sky, but his strength was enough. A sweep of his tail cleaved through rows of orcs, and his dragon flame turned men and steel into ash, leaving scorched earth in its wake. Orcs avoided the great beast like the plague. Smaug's presence alone broke formations and sent panic seeding through their ranks. High above the battlefield, Dewey fought a different war. Million-strong clouds of giant bats blackened the sky, bred by Sauron to blot the sun and allow the Dark Army to operate without daylight's bite. The bats were vast enough to carry men. A few dozen would be trivial for Dewey, but millions were a different matter. He could not cut them down fast enough. Instead, he cast a protective barrier around himself, deflecting the worst of their assaults. But the bats attacked with more than claws. They shrieked in forceful ultrasonic waves. One bat's cry was a nuisance. Tens of thousands, concentrated into a wall of sound, could shred a wizard's focus. Dewey felt the pressure and sealed his ears with a silencing charm. Even so, the screeching pressed at him like a fist. He pulled a mandrake from his satchel, yanked it from its pot, and reached past his own barrier. The root thing woke with a face like someone who had been wronged all their life, and opened its mouth. Sonorous! Dewey added a booming amplification charm. The mandrake's wail flared across the sky, a raw, piercing scream multiplied by enchantment. Bats rely on delicate hearing to navigate. The amplified shriek froze them. Wings went rigid, bodies locked mid-flight, and then the great cloud came apart as thousands of beasts tumbled from the air. The falling mass peeled a rent in the dark curtain, letting sunlight strike the field below. Orcs exposed to those rays howled and staggered, trolls petrified into stone. Falling bats smashed into ranks like living shot, creating chaos and carnage where they struck. Dewey steered the mandrake's scream toward the densest clusters, using it as a weapon to open corridors of sun through the blackness. From a hilltop, Bolg stared in fury. "Bring out the Morgul arrows. Shoot that wizard down. Kill the one in the sky," in black speech. Rows of great crossbows were hurried into place, loaded with arrows carved through with foul spells. These projectiles, the Morgul arrows, had a specific purpose: to break and pierce enchantments. They waited for Dewey to appear, then fired in a dense, unrelenting volley. Dewey saw them come and rose higher, but the arrow's magic-breaking properties left him with no easy defense. He changed course instead, angling directly for Smaug. The dragon's scales could shrug off even Morgul steel. Mounting Smaug would make Dewey effectively untouchable by those bolts. Smaug, frothing and joyful in his own way at the slaughter beneath him, caught sight of the wizard and instinctively opened his maw. He stopped midway, however, and clamped it shut as black smoke seeped from his nostrils. The dragon had been choking on his own fire for a moment, oddly sheepish. "Master, what are your commands?" he rumbled, a touch obsequious. Dewey did not scold him. He landed on Smaug's back, gestured toward the hill where Bolg's command stood, and said, "Bolg is there. Burn him with your flame." "Your will is my direction," Smaug replied, then surged forward. With Smaug as a moving shield, the Morgul arrows glanced off his armor, and the pair closed on the hilltop. Panic spread among the orcs. The sight of Smaug bearing down with the wizard on his back shattered even hardened hearts. Bolg's eyes flickered with fear, then anger hardened his face. "Attack the dragon with the earthworms," he roared. "If we drag him under, he can't hurt us." Dewey and Smaug plowed through orc lines, smashing aside spears and shields, and were only a short distance from the hill when the ground bucked. A tooth-bristled maw burst from the earth and latched onto Smaug's foreleg. The dragon howled, clamped his teeth into the thing's head and pulled, but the creature held like an anchor. Finally, the giant worm, a hulking thing over 100 meters long and roughly 75 meters across, writhed free of the soil and lay like a living boulder on the plain. Its carapace was soiled dark and armored. It had no eyes, only a circular mouth studded with saw-like teeth meant for grinding rock. Exposed air made the worm frantic. Its body rolled and twisted to burrow again, but Smaug would not let it escape. He spewed a gout of dragon flame, and the worm screamed, thrashing as scales steamed and blackened. The smell of burning meat mingled with the earth's dust. "Smaug, be careful. There'll be more," Dewey warned. Earthworms like these tunneled in packs. Sure enough, the ground tore open again as two more gargantuan worms burst out. One sank its teeth into Smaug's neck. The dragon dodged and blasted it. The second clamped onto his tail and began to drag, trying to pull the great beast underground. Dewey acted without hesitation. "Crucio!" he cried, driving the torture curse into the worm that had bitten Smaug's tail. The creature writhed, shrieked, and released its hold. It recoiled, writhing under the spell's agony, but then Dewey pivoted and unleashed the killing curse. "Avada Kedavra!" The beam struck another worm squarely. It went rigid, then lay still, a huge dead thing on the plain. Dewey let himself smile briefly. This was his first confirmed kill with that spell after previous failures had shaken him, and took heart. With two worms neutralized, the remaining one seemed to hesitate, reluctant to risk the surface. Smaug and Dewey pressed on. Then the earth convulsed again. But the movement was not an attack. The living worm that had been left moved over the two corpses, gripped them with its huge mouth, and dragged them down into the tunnel. It left 2 yawning pits where the bodies had been and fell silent. Whatever cunning the earthworms possessed, they preferred to remove their own dead from the field. With the subterranean threat diminished, the sight of Smaug and the wizard advanced. Orc morale shattered. Ranks dissolved as men fled. "Lord Bolg," cried the messenger, pale with fear. "The earthworms couldn't stop Smaug or that wizard. We're no match. Retreat." Bolg's face contorted with rage and cowardice. In a single brutal motion, he smashed the messenger's skull with his mace. Then, with a cold, resolute voice, he ordered the one command that would bury the battle in dark earth: retreat into the tunnels. Chapter 117, Fiendfire. At Bolg's command, the orcs dove into the tunnels the earthworm had burrowed. By the time Dewey arrived on Smaug, he could only cut down the stragglers who hadn't made it in. Bolg and the rest had vanished underground, leaving Dewey with nothing to pursue. He felt the familiar tug of frustration. Bolg was even craftier than his father Azog, retreating at the first sign of danger. Smaug, sensing his rider's helplessness, snorted, "Master, if Bolg hides underground, I'll just torch the tunnels. I'll burn them all alive." Dewey shook his head. "Have you forgotten about the earthworm? As long as it's there, they can burrow anywhere. How far do you think Dragonfire will reach underground?" He had no intention of chasing them into the tunnels. That was the earthworm's domain. But not chasing didn't mean he had no plan. Dewey slid off Smaug and walked to the tunnel mouth. He pointed his wand inside and spoke a single, dangerous word: Fiendfire. A thin, eerie blue wisp spat from the wand tip, alive with violent, malign energy. It smelled of brimstone and old bones. The flame began devouring the nearest flammable things with a speed that was almost hungry. Its appetite threatened anything in its path, Dewey included. His face hardened. With a hard flick, he coaxed the flame inward, directing its hunger into the tunnel. The fire obeyed with the will of something infernal, spreading through the passages until it coalesced into a gigantic, serpentine blaze that filled the burrow. Quickly, Dewey slammed an exploding bolt at the mouth of the tunnel, collapsing and sealing it. Only then did he allow himself a brief breath. Fiendfire was no ordinary spell. It was one of the deepest, deadliest secrets of the dark arts. Fierce, self-consuming fire that grew stronger as it ate, forming shapes of beast and horror and pursuing anything flammable without distinction, including its caster. Most wizards never dared to use it. Few could control it. Only the strongest of dark wizards, Grindelwald, as legend had it, had the mastery to make Fiendfire heed friend and foe. Without such power, a caster could burn themselves to ash. Even in Paris, it had taken Nicolas Flamel, the Scamander brothers, and others to stop Grindelwald's flames from consuming the city. Dewey did not pretend he could master Fiendfire like Grindelwald. He had used it as a weapon and immediately sealed every exit. Inside were only orcs, his enemies, and earth and rock could contain the fire until it starved. That, at least, was the plan. Smaug watched the blue inferno with narrowed eyes and backed away a few steps. "Master, what was that? It feels wrong, more powerful than my flames. If even a little touched me." "Fiendfire," Dewey said. "Devil's fire, hellfire. It eats and it grows. Without the right counterspell, it will never stop." Smaug's pride in his dragonfire, which had melted the sturdiest dwarf-forged armor, took a sudden, wary step back. This was something else entirely, something that made him grateful, if quietly, that his rider had chosen to use it against the orcs, and not him. Dewey was already moving on. He left Smaug to harry the orcs on the surface while he rose on his broomstick to watch. It wasn't long before another tunnel mouth vomited panicked orcs, some trampled underfoot, others scraping out as if fleeing a terror. Behind them, the ground shuddered, and a basilisk-shaped column of fiendfire burst free, hissing like a demon and turning those orcs who had lingered into ash. Dewey flew in, wand flashing. "Get back in there!" An invisible, crushing barrier pushed on the fiery basilisk and forced it to recoil. The fiendfire lashed out, sending tongues of hellfire at Dewey, attempting to break the enchantment. He matched it, chanting and pouring his will into the spell until the flame was forced back. Then, before another exit could open, he brought the exploding bolt down on it, collapsing and sealing the passage. He repeated the tactic, block one mouth, then another, never letting the fiendfire find a place to escape. Every time it sought a way out, He crushed it back into the tunnels and buried the opening. For a while, it was like playing a deadly game of whack-a-mole. Then, miles away to the north, the earth answered with a sound like a mountain groaning. Blue flames shot up into the sky, and a colossal fiery serpent hissed, filling the air with heat and light. Dewey pivoted and raced toward it. By the time he arrived, 100-meter fiendfire basilisk was devouring an enormous earthworm, and, impossibly, Bolg and a handful of orcs were still alive, scrambling from the flames. Before the fiendfire could claim him, Bolg's scream cut off. Dewey had already spoken. Defindo. The dismembering charm cleaved Bolg with terrifying efficiency. Bone and armor separated. Where a leader had stood there was only a scattering of pieces. Dewey didn't pause over it. He turned at once on the incendiary beast. "Finite incantatum," Dewey bellowed. The counter-curse formed a vast shimmering field that wrapped the fiendfire, forcing it to shrink. For ordinary, newly summoned fiendfire, the spell was devastating and absolute. But this was no newborn flame. It had fed on tens of thousands of orcs, towered to the size of a nightmare, and fought like it had a mind of its own. The stronger the fiendfire, the harder finite fought to contain it. Dewey knew it would take 4 or 5 elite aurors to snuff such a blaze completely. He didn't intend to snuff it entirely. He only needed to force it back into the tunnel and seal that exit forever. Stone and earth could not be burned in the long term, and once the flame had nothing left to feed on, it would starve. The fiendfire, cornered, shifted. Its basilisk form melted into a balrog. Curved horns, leathery wings, a barbed tail, and a fiery whip that lashed at the barrier with brutal force. The field wavered under the blows. Dewey poured every ounce of power left in him into the spell. "Get back into the tunnel!" He drove at the shrinking barrier. The fiendfire recoiled, and Dewey struck the tunnel's crown with an exploding bolt. Stone and dirt thundered down, the passage collapsed, and the flames were forced back. He didn't stop until he stacked several more wards and collapses, sealing that exit as tightly as he could. Only then did he let himself exhale. He levitated Bolg's severed head to his side and rode back to the plain. On the battlefield, the allied forces, elves, dwarves, and men, had already begun to tilt the day. Bolg's retreat underground and the havoc Dewey had sown had shattered orc morale. The great eagles, summoned by Gandalf, swooped in and pressed the air advantage, driving the orcs into increasingly frantic, disorganized flight. If the orcs had not outnumbered the armies by several times, the rout would already have finished them. Dewey hung his broom above the field and flung Bolg's head down. He amplified his voice with a spell so it rolled across the plain. "Orcs, your leader is dead. You are defeated." He then produced a horn he had found on Bolg, black, carved from some animal, and etched with spells. He wiped the mouthpiece with a casual, disdainful hand, then blew. The sound that answered was sharp and commanding. The great swarm of bats that had darkened the sky suddenly faltered, then scattered as if obeying an order. Shadow lifted, the sun broke the clouds and poured light back across the land. Orcs, bred for the dark, shrank under that sunlight. Many screamed and collapsed, their fighting strength gone. The trolls, giants of stone and muscle, were caught unshielded in that sudden bright day. Where they stood, they stiffened, their flesh turning to cold, immobile rock. Terror froze on their faces forever. Dewey watched the field clear and allowed himself only a brief relief. The tunnels were sealed. Bolg was dead. The dark flame that had threatened to become an apocalypse had been starved in the dark earth. For now, that was enough. Chapter 118, Post-War. When they learned that Bolg was dead, the orcs scattered in panic. With the great bats no longer blotting out the sun, the light itself felt like doom to them. Many fled blindly, searching for shade. Others, caught in the open, shrieked in pain as sunlight sapped their strength. The elven and dwarven forces, disciplined, veteran troops, pressed the advantage without mercy, cutting the orcs down in a one-sided slaughter. Thorin and the guards of Erebor joined when they could, fighting alongside Dane Ironfoot's dwarves. On the field, the terror was absolute. Smaug, like a living reaper, rained dragonfire across the orc ranks and struck with a tail harder than any battering ram. Bjorn, in his bear form, smashed through enemy lines like a walking fortress. The orcs could not stand against them. Driven by fear and despair, they were slain by the score. The battle raged until sunset. Bolg's horde, hundreds of thousands, was almost entirely destroyed. Those orcs who survived lurched away into the hills and wilds at dusk, exhausted and broken. Their will to fight had been killed along with their numbers. Where once they had been a menace, they were now nothing more than scattered fugitives. When the fighting ended, the field was a grim litter of dark bodies. King Thranduil, Dane Ironfoot, Gandalf, Bilbo, Thorin, and others at last gathered. Except for Thranduil, still immaculate in his silvery finery, everyone wore the grime of battle, splattered with black orc blood. Old enmities between elves and dwarves seemed to fade in the wake of what they had endured. For the first time, they stood together. All eyes, though, turned to Dewey. He had landed on his flying broomstick, Smaug bringing up the rear. Even knowing the dragon had been subdued and now fought beside them, the assembled elves and dwarves instinctively recoiled at the sight of him. Thranduil, Thorin, and Dain tensed, wary as hunters facing a great, untamed force. Dewey told Smaug to stay and approach the others alone. "Let us greet the chief architect of this victory, the slayer of the Orc King Azog and Bolg, the destroyer of their armies, the master of dragons, the black-robed Dewey." Gandalf cried, his voice bright with relief. Bilbo looked on with open admiration. Even Thranduil's austere expression softened. He stepped forward to speak with unexpected solemnity. "Wizard Dewey," Thranduil said, "I must thank you. Had you not turned the tide so swiftly, I fear my people would have bled on this land and not returned to Mirkwood." He paused, the weight of what might have been evident in his tone. "You will be an honored guest of the woodland realm, an eternal friend. Mirkwood's doors will always be open to you." He made a formal elven bow. Legolas, standing behind him, smiled and bowed as well. The elven host echoed the salute, graceful and sincere. Dewey, unused to such ceremony, flushed and replied, "Your Majesty, you are too kind. I am honored to be your friend." He bowed in return. Thranduil smiled and offered, "When matters here are concluded, please accept my invitation to visit Mirkwood. I will host a feast worthy of a king. Legolas speaks of you often. He will be glad." Dain was not to be outdone. The great dwarf chief stepped forward, rough features soft with gratitude. "And the Iron Hills welcome you, Dewey," he declared. "You are a friend of Dine Ironfoot. Come to the Iron Hills when you may." He added, with a proud gleam, "To show our thanks, we will forge dragon armor for your dragon. Surely you will not refuse such a gift." Dewey blinked. He had not expected such largesse. Smaug, sensing the meaning of armor and remembering a black arrow that had once pierced the scales over his heart, looked keenly at Dain with a hungry gleam. Dewey smiled and accepted the offer. The others' expressions shifted. Thranduil's look turned sharp, suddenly cautious. He hadn't thought the blunt-spoken Dain capable of such craftiness. Thorin watched Dewey being courted by both elf and dwarf with a complicated expression. Thorin stepped forward from the crowd. He drew himself up, steadier than he had been of late, and spoke directly to Dewey. "Dewey, I owe you thanks for helping me reclaim Erebor from the dragon, and again now for helping to defend it. I am sorry for the cruel things I said when I was not myself." His voice strained with regret. Dewey's smile faded into something calm. "I am glad to see you clear-minded again. I accept your apology." Relief washed over Thorin's face. "Do not worry. Your promised 10th of the treasure will be set aside and paid to you soon." He added, "And Bilbo shall not be cheated of his share, even though he failed to find the Arkenstone." Everyone noticed the change in Thorin. Whatever had shaken him, dragon sickness or whatever madness had gripped him, had at last loosened its hold. He sounded like a king again. Thranduil used the moment to request the white gem necklace that had once belonged to his late wife, but rather than seize it, he offered payment, hoping to reclaim it honorably. Thorin, now sane and magnanimous, refused the reward and promised to return the relic to its rightful owner. An attempt, he said, to mend relations between the kingdom under the mountain and the woodland realm. This gesture softened Thranduil, who also agreed to return Glamdring, which had been taken from Thorin earlier. Thorin continued to distribute his treasure. He pledged 1/14 to Bard and the people of Lake Town, 1/14 to Dain for leading the dwarves who had marched to his aid, and shares to the 12 dwarves who had accompanied him to Erebor. His generosity surprised everyone. Gandalf, who had feared the worst for Thorin, allowed himself a smile. The kingdom under the mountain might yet prosper under a wise ruler. With matters settled, Thranduil accepted the white necklace and led his host back to Mirkwood. Before they departed, a private matter arose. Toriel, a female elf, asked Thranduil for permission to leave the woodland realm to be with Kili the dwarf. Their paths had crossed when the company was held captive in Mirkwood, and later again when Toriel saved Kili from a Morgul arrow wound with King's foil. Affection had quietly grown between them. Thranduil at first forbade the union. To an elf, whose life stretches through ages, love of a mortal is a perilous thing. Elves are not truly immortal. If grief breaks them, they die as surely as any man. Thranduil could not bear the thought of a daughter of his choosing a life that would end in heartbreak when her dwarf lover outlived or predeceased her. Legolas, who loved Toriel as a sister, urged her not to give up her long life. Kili himself begged her not to sacrifice herself. But Toriel's resolve was firm. She loved Kili, and she would not be turned. Seeing she would not be persuaded, Thranduil relented, though he was heavy-hearted. He permitted her to go and left with a sad Legolas at his side. Kili, moved by her willingness, made a request of Thorin. Toriel did not belong among the halls of Erebor, and he wished to leave the mountain and live with her. Thorin felt torn. Kili was his nephew, and both he and Fili were the closest he had to heirs. Giving up Kili meant sacrificing a future successor. Yet the young dwarf was resolute, and Thorin, reluctantly but out of love, agreed. Duir did not speak for or against the match, but he could not help being curious. He wondered aloud what the child of a dwarf and an elf would look like. Would it favor the stout, bearded dwarves or the tall, fair elves? An absurd image of a pointed-eared dwarf flashed into his mind and made him laugh at himself, quickly brushing the thought aside. As Kili and Toriel prepared to leave, Duir offered them his blessings. "Where will you go?" he asked. Kili and Toriel exchanged a look full of quiet joy. "We will travel," Kili said, smiling. "If we find a place we love, we will settle. If ever you come west," Duir said warmly, "be sure to stop at Weathertop. My door is open to you both. I would be honored to host you." Chapter 119. Divide the Treasure. The Hall of the Lonely Mountain was full that day. Thorin sat upon his throne at the head of the long table. Duir, Gandalf, Dain, Bilbo, and Bard occupied seats along its sides. Beorn had already left after the battle. He had hitched a ride on a great eagle and returned to his own lands. Everyone else had come for one reason: the mountain of treasure in the vault. Thorin's eyes flashed as he looked down at the assembled company. "Over the past few days, I have apportioned the treasures," he announced. "I have called you here so that each of you may receive your rightful share." He paused, then added with a darker note, "The only regret is that the Arkenstone was not found in the vault. This crown precious of my house appears to be lost, gone from its place of glory." A silence rippled through the hall. Dain sprung to his feet, aghast. The Arkenstone gone! How could this be? It was hidden in the vault. How could it not be there? For the dwarves, the Arkenstone was more than a gem. It was the symbol of kingship, the token that bound the 7 dwarf clans to their ruler. Possession of it had once made Thorin not merely the lord of Durin's folk, but king under the mountain, the king all dwarves acknowledged. Without it, he remained the lord of Durin's line, but lacked the unquestioned authority over the other clans. Dain's anxiety was visible. The difference was vast. The 7 clans, Longbeards, Firebeards, Broadbeams, Ironfists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots, had been largely autonomous, yet the Arkenstone had been the bond. It had been unearthed in the days of Thryness and fashioned by the greatest of dwarven smiths. Generations swore fealty to its holder. The news that it might be lost alarmed everyone. Bilbo, who had been watching the others, felt a heavy pang of guilt. If he had been more careful, perhaps the Arkenstone would not have been lost. Duir's expression remained outwardly indifferent. Gandalf's glance flickered between Bilbo and Duir. Something in his face was contemplative. Thorin fixed his eyes on Duir. "Duir, I ask a favor of you." Duir raised an eyebrow. "Speak. May I use your palantir to search for the Arkenstone? I must know where it is." All eyes turned to Duir. He lowered his lids and his gaze had an edge. "You may, but know this. Sauron has discovered that palantir. He once sought to corrupt me through that crystal. I was saved only by the protection of the Lady of Lorien. If you look into it, be prepared to be seen by him, and to be twisted by his influence. Gandalf's face darkened. If Sauron can see Dewey through the Palantir, it means he himself is using a stone. He will be able to watch whatever you see and can try to bend you to his will. His power is subtler and more insidious than dragon sickness. You cannot know when you will be ensnared. Thorin, you must not risk it. Thorin, having shaken off much of his recent madness, but still stubborn as any Durin, stood firm. The Arkenstone is the heart of my house. I will take the risk. I will bear whatever comes of it. He stepped down from the throne and went before Dewey. Please, he said plainly. Dewey met Thorin's gaze without flinching and gave a short, rueful chuckle. You are determined. I have no reason to refuse. He produced the Palantir from a pocket of his traveling gear and set it on the table. Thorin took it in both hands and peered into the crystal. The mists inside cleared. An image of the vault unfolded. For a moment hope flared in Thorin's face. Perhaps the Arkenstone yet lay within. But the vision showed only mountains of gold and jewels. There was no glint of the Arkenstone anywhere. Thorin searched with a desperate intent, but the Palantir revealed no secret nook, no hidden recess where the gem might lie. Eventually, with a sullen shake of his head, he set the stone down. Then it may indeed have been destroyed in Smaug's fire, Thorin muttered. Dewey returned the Palantir to his pouch without commenting. Very well, we have checked. Now let us get on with what must be done. Thorin waved for Balin and the others to lead the company into the vault. The sight that greeted them again stilled them. The cavernous vault held vast piles of treasure, organized into several towering heaps, each like a small mountain. Dewey, Balin said, guiding him toward the largest of the piles. This portion is yours, 1/10 of the whole. He indicated the nearby mounds. These are for Lord Dane, Master Bard, and for you, Bilbo. Dain's eyes shone at the sight of his allotted wealth. No dwarf could refuse such riches. Bard, too, was visibly pleased, what this would mean for the rebuilding of River Valley City and his people. Bilbo's reaction was different. He faced the heap of gold as if he had failed to earn it. I didn't find the Arkenstone, he protested, voice tight. I failed Thorin. I shouldn't take this. Fili and Bofur laughed and gently nudged him back. Now, Bilbo, don't be like this. You were with us throughout. In Mirkwood, you freed us from the spiders. In the Elven halls, you rescued us from imprisonment. You deserve your share. Still, Bilbo hesitated, and in the end meant to take only a modest portion. Thorin saw it and smiled, something like warmth in his expression. He pulled from the vault a shirt of mithril mail and slipped it over Bilbo's small shoulders. The garment was priceless. It lay light as a feather, yet turned aside blades that would have cut through steel. Then Thorin set to piling coin and jewels into Bilbo's arms. Dewey, who watched this, decided Bilbo should not go wanting. With a few quick words and a flick of his wand, he cast an undetectable extension charm on a traveling purse and began filling it until nearly half of the gold mound had disappeared into it. Bilbo shouted that it was enough, and Dewey, grinning, stopped. Thorin could not quite contain his astonishment and amusement at Dewey's extravagance. Dewey, unperturbed by Thorin's expression, produced a large beast-hide purse and enlarged it with a practiced charm until the space inside was something like half a football field. The pouch, as if alive, leapt onto his mountain of gold and began to swallow coins, plate, and gems. In moments, Dewey's 1/10 was compacted into his portable hoard, riches enough to make him among the wealthiest in Middle-earth, save for the lonely mountain itself. Dain and Bard watched, mouths open and envy pricked. Dewey even touched their purses with a spell, though not to the same vast extent. Still, the enlarged pouches were treasures themselves. Any traveler would value such a space-saving charm nearly as highly as a jewel. When each had taken his share, Dewey did not linger. He and Gandalf and Bilbo and Bard for a time left the mountain together and went first to River Valley City. They stayed there for a few days. Then Dewey, Gandalf, and Bilbo set out again. Bard and the townsfolk saw them off with fond reluctance. Dewey left the townspeople several gifts. He bequeathed the use of a fireplace in the city for travel by flue powder, and he gave Bard a small bottle of the powder, an odd little thing, but an invitation to visit Weathertop in the future. Bard later took the house the travelers had used, and in gratitude had it renovated into a fine dwelling, second only to the Lord's mansion. He declared Dewey a permanent friend and a citizen of River Valley City, free to live there whenever he wished. Dewey, however, was unaware of these honors. He was already on the wing. Now Dewey rode on Smaug's back, with Gandalf and Bilbo beside him, heading toward Mirkwood. He had promised Thranduil a visit in the woodland realm and would not break his word. More pressing, though, was the matter of Smaug himself. The dragon's wings had been injured, and Dewey wished to take him to Rivendell so that Elrond the healer might tend them. The truth was that Dewey's extension magic was not yet the sort to shrink a dragon into a pocket dimension. Smaug was a vast beast, well over 140 meters from snout to tail, a head of 12 meters, and a wingspan that measured out at an eye-watering 120 meters. To fit such a body into a space where it could move freely would require nothing less than Newt Scamander's enchanted case. Lacking such power, their only option was the cumbersome but straightforward one: fly Smaug over the misty mountains to Rivendell for proper healing. Dewey had suggested, half in jest, that Gandalf and Bilbo could use the River Valley fireplace and flue powder to get to Rivendell and wait for him there. But neither gray-robed wizard nor small burglar would hear of bypassing the journey. They preferred to feel the journey in their bones, to ride a dragon across the sky rather than arrive in the instant and miss the story of it. A certain gray-robed wizard was content, it seemed, to remain anonymous in his preference.